actually run things. All right. Okay, grassroots, are we ready? Skeleton crew today. Only the really important people are here.
Good afternoon.
Are we there? Are we there? Hold on. Okay, we are. Okay, afternoon, everybody. This is the work session for the Board of County Commissioners, Tuesday, February 20th. And we have staff community presentations this afternoon, starting with the Pitkin County Pavement Conditioning Report. Scott Mattice, Brian Pettit. Brian's not here. Tyler Lambeth, and G.R. Fielding. So take it away, guys.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Mattice, the Road and Bridge Manager. With me I have G.R. Fielding, who is a staff resource on the project. Also Tyler Lambeth, who's not here. He's stuck in travel.
Oh, sorry.
He's our asset management side of it. So we took a lot of the data that was collected and worked it into our asset management program for the county. And then we also have Scott Gordon next to me here from DTS. Great. This year the county hired DTS to perform pavement analysis, and also we did wall analysis this year. This survey created data points that we then loaded into our asset management program. And from that asset management program, we plan our maintenance. We log everything, and I mean everything that we do is logged in our asset management program. In a second, GR is going to give some of the background history, because this isn't our first time doing an analysis. And then also Scott is going to touch base on the technology, how we collected a lot of our data. There's some really neat things neat ways to collect this data. There's a neat van. He'll show pictures and describe the van. Some of our pavement maintenance strategies moving forward, what some of the pavement distresses look like, and then also what are some of our budget scenarios moving forward.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer. I worked a lot with Scott on this program. In fact, the last two times that our board has seen this, I was the project manager that brought this sort of thing forward. We did this in 2007. It was actually one of the first things that I did as the county engineer. Again, we did another survey in 2010. The one in 2010 ended up being very instrumental, because it was in 2012, coming out of the recession, when the county went from funding the road program from somewhere in the tune of $400,000 a year back up to $1.5 to $2 million a year. And a little bit of what you're going to see here is a good news, bad news thing. The good news is, because of that investment that the county decided to make from 2012 to present, we have seen and we have kept up with our pavement condition. And pavement condition is a very specific thing, but we've done a great job of keeping up with that. A little bit of the bad news thing that we can talk about a little bit later is that whenever we take away from that pavement condition program to do our safety improvements or next year's bridge project, it kind of delays everything else on the roads. We see that as over our entire network, because we don't have that resource to get spread out. Back when we talked about this before, we decided as a county to go to a best first maintenance scenario. And we've just started to pull out of that because we got caught up with a lot of our best firsts. So the roads that were in the best condition got smaller treatments to keep them in the best condition. And it hasn't been until recently that we've even touched any of the roads that were lower down in our conditions. We've been very effective with that, as I said. But moving forward, we'll talk about maybe going to worst first to get some of those lower rated roads and pull those back up and then have everything in that higher condition. And again, a little bit of just something to talk about context here. We're not talking about all of the other projects that might pull from our program, like rockfall, safety improvements, shoulder widening, and those sorts of things. This is really just our chip seals, our overlays, crack seal, and like full reconstruction of roads. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott from DTS.
Okay, thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk with you. Little background, I'm a pavement geotechnical engineer with DTS and in charge of the quality and and basically running through the analysis of what we're collecting here as far as the pavement distress and the network. I'm based out of the Dallas office, but I have lived in Colorado for quite a while. I was here about 11 years working as a consultant and have a PE license here, so I am familiar with the conditions and what's happening here in Colorado. I wanted to go over a little bit first of kind of what the broad pavement management process is and how what we've done fits into that. But pavement management is basically a way for decision makers to identify and apply the cost-effective strategies to maintenance. A couple of things it does: it'll mitigate the risk of what we're doing with our budgets. It'll drive strategic planning to help us better coordinate what we're doing with the money, promote consistency throughout the organization so we have a work plan that we're working toward. Even if we do have some turnover throughout, we're working on the plan, and we can stay consistent with that. We also get a lot of stakeholder buy-in and collaboration. When people understand your process, your goals, where you're headed, how you're running through making your decisions, they seem to buy into the system. And of course, bottom line, we want to save time and money, or in this case, probably spread our budget out further.
Can you tell us how long the tape lasts?
Yeah.
That's only the blue masking tape.
I won't go where I took that picture. I won't tell you where that is, but that's not an effective treatment.
My driveway.
This is a typical deterioration curve that we work with. And the scales on the side here with this good, fair, poor, excellent, that can be anything. A lot of the scale we use is 0 to 100. It's basically tracking the condition of the roadways, how they deteriorate over time. The theory of what I'm trying to get across here is in the upper level, the early years of deterioration, the maintenance that we need to apply to keep a roadway in good condition is about $1 a square yard. As we start dropping off over time, you can see it falls rather quickly. Associate that with a lot of cracking, a lot of moisture infiltration, your subgrades start to deteriorate, your bases fail. Then you start getting a lot worse performance, and now you're looking at rehab and major reconstruction. So the cost can be anywhere from $4 to $10 to sometimes $10 more a square yard for treatment once you get. So the theory is we'd rather keep it up in this range. You go to the next slide. This is kind of showing a couple different philosophies of what we go through with maintenance. One would be to let the road deteriorate to a failure point, and then we totally reconstruct it. And if you're, to give you a scale here, this age may be a 40-year period. So during that time frame, we're having at least one major reconstruction to bring the road back up, then it starts deteriorating again. The conflicting philosophy of what we're looking at is more of a preventive treatment where we're using smaller, more cost-effective treatments to get increases in the condition of the roadway. It'll continue to deteriorate, and we bounce it up again. The biggest difference here is what you see is we're getting small improvements versus large, so the cost is much smaller. We have multiple treatments, so we may be accessing the road more, but the road closures we're dealing with to do this rehab are a day time frame. It's a much quicker closure versus if we have to do a reconstruction, you may be up to a month of closure to get that done. So the citizens will see maybe more activity on the roadway, more frequent closing over a 40-year period, but it's short times that we're doing that instead of one big rebuild. This is basically just kind of a hierarchy of pavement management where we go from data collection to estimating the life of a roadway, how long it's lasting, deteriorating, what kind of maintenance strategies we're working on, then we associate a cost with doing that maintenance. And then the last two boxes are what I'd call a network level, where we start prioritizing our different roads, which ones receive funding, and run through the budget allocation of how much money do we spend and which roads are we selecting for treatment. And this kind of gives a full circle of how that's broken down in a typical pavement management program. You'll have a project level where we collect the condition, the information, performance predictors, recommendations, cost, versus at a network where we're looking at all the roadways at once. We start doing prioritization budgeting. Then we look through our resources, and then we can even do a risk-based prioritization where a heavy volume road would carry a higher risk for treatment than a low volume. And then the point at the bottom is really a lot of what we're seeing now is cities and counties are going to internet, cloud-based database programs to save on storage cost and things that they have to take care of themselves. So to get in a little bit more detail on what we did in this pavement condition study, this is the equipment we use to run the roadways to collect the pavement data. A few things I'll point out here. In the back here is our Lyris laser illuminated cameras that are oriented straight down to the pavement. What we're doing there is looking at the actual distress, and I've got some photos later. I'll show you what we get out of those cameras. A couple things to note up here. We do have a right-of-way camera that faces backwards. If you have a wrong-way sign, we're starting to see a lot of states will put barcodes in the back of their signs. We can pick up those barcodes with these cameras, and it helps with your data, understanding what signs you've got where, when they need to be replaced. On the front, you'll notice 3 cameras that are oriented that picks up everything within the right-of-way. So we can track assets such as sidewalks, curb gutter, street striping. We can look at road signs. We can look at traffic lights, signal lights, those type of things. Another note, we have a GPS unit associated at the front and the back. That gives us more accuracy for tracking GIS location. And it's a little hard to see here, but in the front we have a laser system on the front bumper that's shooting lasers straight down to the ground. And those are used to measure rutting, ride roughness, some faulting if we have concrete pavements, and some different things. So go on to the next one. Just a little bit better look at the rack system on top of the vans. You can see the 3 cameras. They can be mounted and positioned at different rotations and angles so we can make sure and see within the right-of-way what we're trying to capture. And then once again, you can see the top GPS. That's fine. And this shows kind of the sequence of what we go through collection. So we can get the right-of-way images. We can also get the cracking and the information on the pavement. We pick up the IRI, their internal roughness index, along with rutting and faulting. And then that's all integrated through GIS mapping. So with our system, we can track every asset that we're picking up in a GIS location, and therefore illustrate it on our mapping system. This gives you just some of the details of what we do as far as quality. Texas Transportation Institute has a road program that we run our vans through every year to certify them to make sure they're giving us accurate readings. Our profilers, our operators are all certified. And this just gives you a little bit more detail about some of the equipment that we're running. This is a quick video. If you'll run that, GR, it'll show kind of the images. We take an image about every 12 feet as we go down the roadway, and we can link these together in what we call a video log, but you can start to see just some of the images we're working on. And this is just one front camera on the van, but you can start to see crosswalks, you can see striping, you can see the signal lights, and we can freeze frame that at each frame, use GIS, and basically locate the pinpoint each base of those light standards or these poles or any signs that we have there. So you can basically see anything within the right-of-way, we can locate it. We can also look at a condition assessment on that. There we go. So here's some of the 4K laser imaging. You hear now about the TVs being 4K. We're way ahead of that with our cameras. So we're getting very clear images of the distress in the pavement. If you'll go to the next one, you give us a little bit better detail, but you can start to see the crack orientation through here. So as we collect this data, it is sent back to our main office in Orlando, and our raters run through all this information. If you go to the next one, you can start to see how we use vector analysis to measure. So we're using this with basically a mouse pointer. We'll draw these vectors at each distress, at each crack. If we get an area of concentrated, like alligator cracking, a lot of times we'll use a polygon just to represent that area. And that's how we measure, rate, and determine what type of distress we're dealing with for the scales. This just gives you another little image of what we're seeing here. This is our track that the van, these little shapes represent everywhere we took a photo. So a technician can go through and pick and say, I want to look at this one here, click on it. He'll get an image of the pavement. He'll get an image out of the right-of-way camera. You can look and see what type of distress measured out here, and then validate that with a visual that you're seeing in the front van. So this saves a lot of time from people having to walk the road and take notes and take photos. We get this at speed, driving the speed-rated speed limits on each street. We don't cause traffic problems. We don't have to have traffic control while we're out collecting the data. Gives you a little bit more information of how we look at the identifying the type, the severity, and the extent and measurement of that distress. This will show kind of the GIS centric of the reports. So what we're looking at is survey areas where we may look at detail of the distress. It's more cost effective to look at representative areas instead of having to pull out every single crack within the full roadway. So we use this survey area to represent the overall condition of the roadway. Gives you a little bit more detail of what we're measuring. So we call it a pavement condition index. There is an ASTM requirement that we follow for the measurements and calculation of this.
ASTM?
Yes. American Standards of Technology Materials.
Thank you.
Most of your highway construction, all your materials, your processes will be controlled with that type of regulation. So basically what that tells us is we're going to have consistency throughout the measurement of it. So we're working on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being failure, 100 being perfect brand new roadway. When we identify distress type, what we're also looking at is low, moderate, and high severities based upon these definitions found within ASTM. And then we have deduct curves for each of those distresses at the severity level. So that's subtracted from 100. So when you add up all the distresses in an area, you get this pavement condition index score. Typically, we'll use it in a network level for budgeting, and we'll show you some of the results of that later. And then we start to identify rehabilitation types based upon these scales that we're running into, and then can start the initial prioritization of how we want to treat the roadways. This gives you a little bit more of the surveys, how we can show these in different maps versus aerial views or mapping. Look at the survey areas that we looked at and analyze the distress. Like I said, we find it's the most cost-effective way to look at the short surveys. It's representative. We do have images available on the entire roadway, so if we provide information to Pitkin County and GR wants to go out and look at, well, was that consistent throughout the roadway, he can step through those images and get a comfort level that what we saw in these particular survey areas did exist throughout the entire roadway.
Yeah, one of the things that it's hugely valuable for is there's a lot of times when we start talking about a project and we've already gone out and done a lot of measurements, and then maybe we don't remember something quite as accurately as we'd hoped. We can always go back to the images in here and just literally click to a spot and we have images of that area.
You know, I've seen this type of presentation before at CCI in terms of their roadway and their road and bridge crew sections, and you know, so I can see the value of the material. You guys are asking us to kind of step up to a new or different level of better pavement management systems than we had in the past, and in many ways these systems didn't even exist 10 years ago.
Right. So now we'll get into a little bit more of the detail of what we found in this recent analysis. So if you want to go ahead and talk about the map, GR.
Sure.
Do you want a pointer?
Sure.
That middle button.
This is our county-wide map, and one of the things, the first map that you guys saw was the actual map from 2007. This is our current map. Already we've made a call on, where's the pointer on this?
Right in the middle there.
There we go. This is Thompson Creek Road up here. It's one of our lower rated roads. We've made a decision this budget cycle that we're going to pave the first 4/10 of a mile and let the remaining of that go back to gravel. You'll see that by and large we are green and yellow, which puts us on the upper end of the spectrum. We do have a couple small anomalies, like this is actually Little Elk Creek, which we had them drive because it is listed as a county road, even though we don't do the maintenance on that road. And you can see like our big longer roads like Castle Creek and Maroon Creek are green. We paved, say, Castle Creek in 2012. You can see the darkest green is West Cypress Creek. We paved that about 2 weeks before they drove our roads. And so that
control.
Yeah. But the cool thing to see here is the fact that in the last 10 years, the good news is that we've had enough budget. We've touched most of our roads. We haven't really made improvements to them, but we've kept up with that condition index.
Okay.
And okay, never mind. Okay.
This just gives you a layout of how the scoring came out. And the thing that jumps out right up top is 80% of your roadways are above a PCI of 70. So they're in satisfactory to good condition, which is a great a great situation to be in. You can see some of them fall down into the fair and the poor, but you really don't have any in the major failing issues. And GR pointed out to me this morning that some of these roads aren't even maintained by the county. We ran those because they're on the system, but they may be gravel roads or may not be a roadway you particularly are concerned with. This is just another way to show the distribution. This once again is PCI Index here. So you see a bulk of the roadways are in the good satisfactory condition rating. This is a pie chart to show the type of distresses that were predominant within the roadways. So this first one at 20% is linear cracking, which that's a distress. It's very common for the high altitude environments. It's basically your subgrades are expanding, contracting. The asphalt's a stiffer material on the surface, and at some point it's got to relieve the stress. So you're going to see a lot of cracking in that asphalt where your subgrade's moving, and it just creates a relief for the stress within the asphalt. Very common in this region. The AC raveling and weathering is the majority of the distress we found, up at 66%. That is, once again, very common to the environment that we're in with the snow plows, the conditions you have. Your roadway surfaces are just going to show some weathering. And what that really means in layman's term is you can see the aggregate exposed in an asphalt concrete surface. So it creates maybe a little bit rougher texture than a brand new asphalt mat would be. Sometimes what we may catch is if you've got a very coarse chip seal that's been placed on the roadway, it may classify as a low raveling severity. So that may be part of the data that we're picking up here.
I wanted to ask, so
Sure.
this doesn't include chip seal, or is chip seal a category of asphalt, or how do you categorize that?
Chip seal is included into this. And so, yeah, it would be all of our asphalt roads, our chip sealed roads. Basically, all of our pavement in Pickens County is captured in here because we don't have much, if any, concrete.
Got it. Okay.
It basically falls in a surface type.
Right. All right.
We don't see it as, now, like I said, if it's coarse enough, a chip seal, it could fall into the slightly weathering, so the distress would pick up on that. But a chip seal is going to seal most of your cracks, give you a good skid-resistant surface, so it's a good treatment. The other portions we found, a little bit of lane shoulder drop-off and some edge cracking at about 8%. So that's pretty typical for a county road environment where you don't have large shoulders. You're basically just getting that edge is starting to crack a little bit because of lack of support. You want to talk about this one? This is some of your neighborhood information that we're looking at.
So this is in Steve's neighborhood, or near it. So this on the bottom here, this is Capitol Creek Road, and then this is the Little Elk Creek subdivision. The board actually has something on their agenda for next week to talk about Little Elk Creek. We use this as an example, though, because it had all the colors. But you can see that we have, Capitol Creek Road is rated as satisfactory. It's not the highest classification because when we did all the work to it a few years ago, we did a lot of improvements to the shoulders. We did some asphalt patching, but the condition of that road was so low when we started that it got it up into the 70s. It didn't bring it all the way to say 100. If you're familiar with Little Elk Creek subdivision, that's these roads shown on the top here, and they had recently done work at the same time as we'd done with Capitol Creek Road. One of the things that this emphasizes is picking the right treatments for our roads, doing them at the right time, and just because that you've done work on the roads doesn't bring it up to that 100 necessarily. It brings it say a percentage higher.
Okay. So this is really just to show some of the decision process, what we set up in our analysis. So once we get all the condition data, we wanted to run through a couple budget analysis. So GR and his staff helped us put together what type of activities do you like to use within the county? What are some of the general costs per square yard we're seeing with those treatment types? Then we look at, based on that, what kind of impact, basically what kind of improvement are we going to improve that PCI score based upon a particular activity. And this PCI range is where we're most likely going to apply that type of treatment. So if the road exist at a 55, then we're probably looking at a 2-inch overlay. If a road's up in the high 80 PCI range, you're probably just looking at doing some crack seals. This is if we choose to do nothing from this day forward, going 10 years, this is how the resultant score would continue to deteriorate. So obviously this is a simulated model, but based on those deterioration curves that we developed from the data, if we were not to apply any maintenance, we would start at a 78 today, or actually last summer, and by 2027 we'd be down to about a 56, 57 overall network rating. Running through some of the budget analysis, we are able to set a different budget amount at each year, or we can set a constant budget throughout there. We can inflate based on inflation rates and run scenarios at different values. This is just kind of a setup chart to show you how we do some of that. So the next several slides are going to be some scenarios we ran on a 5-year budget analysis. And some of the data, we'll point out a few things that you can see here. So on the current, this was treating, all three of these are looking at worst first. So we're going to treat the worst performing roads first, work our way through the budget. This is a current budget scenario that we ran through here that varied by year. If GR, you want to?
Yeah, and something to notice about the current budget scenario, you can see that those first couple years are a bit lower, and then we get larger, and then we get smaller. That was a little bit of what I was talking about earlier, is we try to put as much money into our pavement maintenance as we can, but when we have the bridge projects, when we have some of these other things, it's competitive. We only have that finite resource, and so we do see that come out in the data through this.
So just to be specific about that, with your annual budget, and it triples one year and then it doubles again the next. Is that including the bridge, or is that the lower numbers reflect that the money's been diverted to bridge or safety?
Exactly.
Okay, the lower numbers mean that's the year of the bridge project.
Right.
Got it. Just want to make sure. Thanks.
Just, again, maybe for a little more background, I think both Greg definitely wasn't here then, and Steve may have come in on the tail end of it. While we were in the middle of the recession and we were looking at these items and needs, and there were some larger real rebuilds in some areas. Airport Business Center was a big one. Frying Pan Road was a big one. Others. But we made the decision to use capital reserves into this budget because the price of getting the work done was so good. It was so competitive while people were out of work that we really just decided to spend it then and get the money. So it wasn't a replenishing source. And John, you would have to fill in the blank here about our actual road and bridge mill levy is fairly low, and then we use sales tax to accomplish that?
Yeah, that's correct, Rachel. So it varies from year to year, but roughly around 45 to 50% of sales tax. It varies.
Right.
Goes into our capital plan, and then that capital plan is used for capital maintenance items, and then our road and bridge fund, which we really pulled out this year as a separate fund, is funded through the mill levy for a lot of the maintenance work and that sort of thing. So it's a combination of sales tax and property tax, and
our little highway user trust fund.
And our HUTF, our small amount of HUTF, thank you, that's being used to fund that. And you're correct that we did take advantage of both being able to leverage some favorable CDOT bids on asphalt, for example, when we did the Castle Creek project, as well as favorable pricing, I think, to help us out. Now, that was also coming on the heels of several years of probably underfunding our maintenance,
yes.
Particularly our capital maintenance. And so what I think I'd point out is to where we've ended up is roughly, I think, just slightly better than what we predicted when we brought the new capital plan forward and road maintenance plan forward, but within the range of what we predicted, a little bit better. And so these investment models tend to have a good predictive quality to them.
Okay, and then I guess what I wanted to get to is are we hearing and seeing kind of new needs, or is this in our capital budget to be spent? How well do we accommodate those budget numbers?
It's a great question, Rachel. And that was a little bit of my intro with the good news, bad news. The good news is this is what's baked into our budget as it stands right now. The bad news is that we're still not contemplating widening any shoulders, doing any rock fall projects, and seeing the hit when we do other big capital projects that basically we don't have enough money to do a road project that year.
And so we've been talking about this for, I think, particularly the last couple budget cycles, that we are not in a capital improvements mode. We are in a capital maintenance mode. And so in terms of improving our capacities, whether it be through shoulder improvements or, good Lord, actual infrastructure improvements, we are really limited on that front. But we are doing a good job maintaining what we have.
Well, that parallels the mode that CDOT moved into many years ago, knowing they had very, very limited money for capacity or for capital improvements, but had to maintain what they had. And that's been their philosophy because there's just not the money there. Okay, thank you.
So a couple things to kind of take away here and to watch in the next series of slides is obviously looking at this score, and you see the bump there, the rise when we increase the budget amount and the consequence of that. The other thing to watch over here is full depth construction. This top chart is distribution of costs, so that's just a percentage of where the money's going. The lower one is the projects, and this is just percentage of project numbers, okay? So you see early on, this blue number is 2018, a large distribution of funding into very few projects because it's all going to reconstruction. The majority are going to be very cheap crack sealing. It doesn't even show a bump here because it's a very cheap operation, but that's what a majority of the streets. As you see us go through the years, you'll see we start catching up. We come down on the distribution of costs put into reconstruction. The projects go up a little bit but come back down. Now on the back end, we're starting to see we're able to get out there and do more chip seals. So we're basically catching up with some of the reconstruction, getting more in a preventive mode at that point toward the tail end of that. So just kind of keep an eye on those.
Question, just
Sure.
how much time does chip seal buy you, or crack seal? For starting with a crack seal, you take care of little superficial cracks.
Why don't we go back a few slides then, GR?
Sorry, just if it's brief.
Just to those tables, there you go. So here's what we used in the model. So if you apply a crack seal, we're getting a PCI bump of 2 points. Basically, in theory, all you're doing is sealing the cracks. They're still there. They don't go away. So you may change the severity of the crack to a low severity crack. So therefore, your bump or improvement in score is not that significant. On a typical basis, you're probably resealing the cracks every other year. So it's a frequent treatment to seal it. And the benefit of what you're getting that is keeping moisture from infiltrating into that crack and the distress propagating even further.
And depending on the road, we're probably about every 3 years on our rotation for crack seal, Scott. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's 3 to 4 years really on crack seal.
And then one of the things and why the crack seal always shows up as the first line of defense is if I show you a crack now that doesn't get sealed, that doesn't get treated, I can show you a pothole in a few years.
Right. But are you kind of asking how much longer how much gain is there in terms of the length of the asphalt from the activity?
Right. So if you remember back that earlier chart, if we bump it up 2 points, I'm really not extending my life, but maybe a year. Now, if I go into a chip seal, I'm bumping 15 points. There's a couple ways to look at it, but if you're increasing that curve 15 points, you're extending that deterioration out, so you may gain 5 to 8 years on a chip seal. An overlay, you're gaining more about 10 years, 10 to 12 years. Okay? Reconstruction, you're going back to point 0, and most of them are design life about 20, 25 years. So that's kind of the scale we're looking at.
And even when you do a full chip seal or an overlay, then it just falls back into the crack seal category, and you start crack sealing it from there.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the problem with pavements. They continually deteriorate.
Yeah, well, everything does.
So what we did in the next scenario is GR gave us let's go a bump in a budget and go a consistent 1.5. throughout all 5 years, and let's see the consequences of that. So immediately you see a bump from the previous being at about 78 up to 84, and you see we hold fairly consistent with that. This number is going to vary depending on what type of project you're picking up that year. You may have a very large road you pick up one year, so you see a bigger bump. The next year that road's not in cycle, you're not needing to treat it. Maybe you're treating several smaller roads. So it kind of changes. The bumps in the PCI are basically what projects we're picking up each year and how that's affecting the overall. The bigger take from this is, let's go back and look at this again. Full depth reconstruction. With more budget in year one, I'm able to put more distribution of my cost into reconstruction. Let's get more roads repaired quickly, okay? A little bit higher percentage in the projects that we're able to work on, so we're able to treat more roads. The other thing you start noticing is we're able to jump into our chip seal preventive program quicker because we've taken care of some of our problematic roadways. We're seeing some more overlays kicking in, so that money up front is allowing us to take care of some of those worst roads first, get them up, and you'll see on the tail end, the last 3 years of this analysis, we're really more in preventive mode. So if you'll go, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and just one thing to add, and to maybe state it a little bit stronger. One of the reasons that I picked this scenario was to show something that's close to a straight flat line. And when we approve, when staff comes to get the budget approved every year, you see a bottom line, and we have a couple different categories that we put projects in. What this is contemplating is having about $1.5 million a year that just goes into pavement maintenance.
Funny how that worked out to 1,499 on each year.
Well, we don't want to bust 1.5.
Yeah, there we go.
Stay right under it.
Stay
That's
right
that $1.99 theory.
Yeah.
But that doesn't include the bridge.
Well, and that doesn't include the bridge. And this is the money that would actually go into the pavement itself.
So this would be an increase
Yes.
From where we're currently budgeted.
Okay. By how much, John? I mean, where do we fit it in? How?
Depending on the year, we need to go back through year by year, but quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to set up this last budget scenario, we just picked a number at $750,000 on top of that to see, you know, really if we wanted to kind of start going towards something that is a higher rating of road, what would that look like? So it's kind of like, all right, what if we just kind of drew that flat line off of this year, and then what if we wanted to take a step up from that?
So yeah, hypothetically, if we run through a higher budget here, you're going to see a slight uptick in our PCI scores. I think we're a point or two higher across the scale. The other thing to go back and note, we're still picking up some more full depth reconstruction, but we're done after year one. There's really no projects after that we're having to rebuild because we've shifted in such a preventive mode. We've stopped a lot of those roads that will deteriorate into a reconstruction mode 3 or 4 years from now. If we go out and seal them and take care of them now, they won't fall into that category. We'll do that bounce that I was showing on the deterioration. So we're not going to let them keep deteriorating down. So it's a large budget, but it allows you to look at it and do a couple different things. You get in more preventive mode of trying to take care of the roads and keeping them in that good shape. You're able to, I think, affect more projects. So you distribute the money a little bit broader to where maybe in the earlier scenario, you're not in 5-year span, you may not touch every roadway.
Oh, yeah.
There are roadways out there we can't get to under this budget in 5 years. This one will allow us to get in more of those roadways included.
And that pretty much brings us to the end of the actual presentation portion. And these are just some of the discussion items that we put in the AIS. And basically, we want to see if you guys had any technical questions. And really, a lot of the presentation was based on moving towards that worst first philosophy for a little while to get those middle tier roads and bump them up so that they're just in that regular maintenance schedule. We already talked about if we did want to move to the 1.5 or $2.25 million a year scenario, we would have to identify additional funding. Staff isn't prepared with that sort of thing today, but it's one of those things that we come back every few years and say we could always do more with more. Again, there's only the one capital replacement of the bridge in our 10-year plan. This is the balancing act that staff is doing right now. We're holding off on the rockfall, the intersection improvements, the widened shoulders, and the safety improvements because we set the policy basically just to really focus on keeping that condition of our roads in a good standing.
Greg?
Now, oh, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of your discussion items, the last bullet point, I believe we should identify the capital improvements and replacements for future budgeting. You know, looking at just the maintenance without those, you know, it doesn't give us or the public a fair look at our situation. So I'm a definite yes on, you know, updating the capital replacement plan. You know, we've got some things done. Now it's time to look at what needs to be done next. I can't say I'm moving to a full funding scenario until we really go over the budget.
Yeah.
But I think I would be fair to say I'd like to see us get more money into roads, you know, one way or the other. And I think we also have to really watch what's going on with the entire state process and whether there ends up being that initiated state ballot through Denver Metro Chamber, which would have a significant share back. Now, I don't know if it's enough to close this gap, but it might be enough that really makes a difference, you know, in terms of how we structure all of this going forward. I'm okay with moving into the worst first philosophy, given that others are in good shape now. I would be a little worried about are there roads that are going to be in the middle that might end up at the end of the list, and a little bit of maintenance now would keep them from going to the worst. So I think we have to balance between the worst first philosophy and the middle, you know, keeping the middle up where it is now, at least, if not going down further. And I don't have any technical questions regarding the data or data collection, but I guess other than saying, is this something we might redo like every 5-year cycle or something like that, 7-year?
Yeah, we've bounced between about a 3 and 5 year cycle for this type of thing.
Okay. So those are my general philosophies, but again, really, I can't see us kind of pursuing a new revenue source until we know what is going on, if there's going to be a statewide initiative or not. And, you know, the sense from the Front Range players and their cogs is that if they don't, this is their last shot for a statewide solution. And if that doesn't go, they're going to work on individual RTAs and do it themselves as individual balkanized system, because they've just too tired of waiting for a statewide answer to CDOT to come forward, and they can't wait any longer with their congestion. So I'm really hoping that that's a good shot, but I can't imagine really kind of planning until we know what the outcome is on that.
Steve?
Yeah, I would agree with going to treating the worst stretches first and looking at the poor and very poor stretches, which is a small percentage of it, but if we could get those up to a fair condition pretty quickly, and by turning the Thompson Creek Road largely back into gravel, that actually helps us on our cost for upgrading that road real quickly and just repaving the part that is heavily used to the cross-country center. I guess ideally, the one that was the $1.5 million budget every year to me looked like a good goal to try to get to that point. So then we could just keep the roads, you know, closer to maintained without huge capital input. It's more evening it out. To get there, I know that one tax issue failed here for money for roads, so I don't know if it would fare any better at this point if we took a tax issue forward for the roads. So the wild card really is the special projects, that the bridge replacement, rockfall, different things that cost more, and I guess we'll just have to take those on a case-by-case basis. And but I think the public would be happy if we can, you know, the roads by and large are in pretty good shape right now, and I think if we can keep them from not having noticeable deterioration, and I keep thinking of Upper Capitol Creek Road a few years ago,
Right.
which was probably on about the failed state on this chart, where it would have been easier to turn it back into gravel at that point than to repave it. But I think the public would be happy if, you know, we maintain the roads in good condition, prevent like real dangerous situations from happening, and fixing them if there is a real dangerous intersection or something. But people don't, at least on the rural roads, I think the residents are happy keeping them more of a rural atmosphere to them and not necessarily making them wider shoulders or those sorts of things. So I think we could save some money on that.
I agree with what Rachel and Steve have said for the most part. I think it's interesting to see how the process. I had just a couple of questions regarding, you do the survey every few years, is that right, with the van? The van just comes up and does, how long does it take for that to
This is actually our first time using the van. We did the surveys earlier manually, and we did it in 2007 and then at very end of 2010. So it's kind of bled into 2011 by the time we did the analysis. And then because we had the major uptick in funding right after the last one, we knew that anecdotally that we were doing well, but this was finally like, oh, we should probably, make sure that we get this in now to be able to measure where we're at. Right. And then Scott can answer about how long it took for them to drive the roads.
It took a little over a week.
Yeah.
About a week to drive all the roads.
A few days, yeah. We can drive at speed limits, so it's pretty quick. We can pick up 30, 40 miles a day.
Got it. Okay. Interesting.
The van actually reminded me of what the railroad companies use for checking their tracks. And also what they use it on the airport on the runway for checking the...
Right.
Just checking the, I can't think of the word they use, how slippery it is for the planes to land. Yeah. Where it's just a one drive over and you can tell a whole lot real quickly and easily.
Well, as being someone that used to have to do this manually, walking the roads, I love the system. What used to take me months and almost a full year to evaluate certain networks, I can do in a matter of a week or two now. Some of the biggest programs we work with may take up to 2 months to collect, and I'm talking like 8,000 miles. We did state of Colorado several years ago. I think we did that in about 3 months, but I think it was close to around 12,000 miles.
Right. And how many miles do we have on this for paved roads?
Oh, paved roads, we're only dealing with 110.
110. Got it. Just in the last, safety improvements delineation, that's just restriping, or is that more? What's delineation?
We can, we're going to have a work session in April on the local road safety plan that we've been developing. We can talk a little bit more about those sorts of things, but it's more than just striping. It's adding of delineators. There's a lot of different tools in that toolbox, but it's something that, frankly, that we put a lot of eggs in this basket recently, and so all of these other things are starting to bubble up again too.
Sure.
So yeah, we can work through a lot of what those sorts of things look like when we do that work session.
Great. As I know, as our transportation modes are changing somewhat, we keep talking about more bikes and more e-bikes and different sorts of vehicles and uses on the roads and sharing the road with other slower vehicles, perhaps. That all plays into that. I don't have any other questions. I think it's great information. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rachel?
Just a kind of a stray comment here, but when we had our CDOT presentation last summer, it was earlier in July, I think, because of the bridge closing, and I don't think Highway 82 was on their maintenance overlay list at all for like within the next 5 years. That seemed to have been my query as we watch the road fall apart. Now, they did a little on Main Street for the city, which was totally falling apart in that bus lane. And it just strikes me that if we ran your system from here out to Old Snowmass or something, you know, what state would we be able to tell the CDOT that our road is in, and for George maybe to be taken to the TPR about advancing our repavement? I don't know what it would cost to get that sort of information or whether it would make any difference at all. But I know that whenever I drive, which frequently, you know, the roads all across the state are falling apart. They're all, you know, in that fair condition unless they were, or below, unless they were just redone. But the alligator cracking is everywhere. The seams are coming apart, and the trucks are chewing it up. And I just am hopeful the public will take note and be willing to pay for more improvements, because you only can do what you can with the dollars available, and it's sure not coming from the feds anymore.
Unfortunately, number one, I know CDOT collects that data on a regular basis. So if you push CDOT, they would probably have that information to share with you.
We don't have to hire you guys
What the
to do
highway
it on the side.
condition is. Unfortunately, like everyone, they're dealing with limited budgets.
Yes.
They can't take care of everything I'm sure they want to.
Oh, I know, yeah.
So it becomes a priority basis.
Yeah, I don't blame CDOT.
Yeah.
You know, they've been making this case clear to people for a long time. It's just that, you know, you notice if you've lived here long enough where they used to pave 3/4 of a mile section, you know, or something. Now it's only one lane for 500 feet, and they'll come back the next year and do another 500 feet on one lane. They don't even get the efficiency out of their mobilization because they can only afford to do such a small section of road each time.
Right.
John, did you have a question?
Just a quick question on the data. Do you do any benchmarking, or do you have any sense of how our road condition indexes are comparing to other communities?
Thanks, I was going to ask that.
Everyone asks that question. Yes, of course, everybody wants to know how they compare. Number one, I think you're in good condition. Obviously, looking at the two highest categories was 80% of your network. So I think just from an outsider's observation, the roadways are in pretty good shape. I obviously see plenty of systems that are in the 50s and 60s on average. I think probably the most common we see is in that 70 range of average. So in that you're sitting at the high 70s, low 80s already, tells you you're in pretty good shape. The PCI, it's a unique index, and a lot of people will do variations from it as to how they are looking at different distresses. So I hesitate to compare an actual score to one another, but looking at the ranges and categories, I'd say you're above average.
That's all we wanted to know.
Sure.
Thank
Like
you.
Lake Wobegon.
Right, exactly. So important. Thanks for coming in. What else do
Thank
you
you.
want? What else
Yeah,
have you got
thanks
for
for
us? Is
having
that
me.
it?
I think that's it for us today.
Great. Thanks. Scott, are you around for a while? Are you just here for the day? What's your?
I've got to run back to Denver. We've got a Rocky Mountain Asphalt Producer Conference the rest of the week, and
Well, that'll
visit
be
with
fun.
more communities there, and
Get some swag for us.
Yeah.
Hats.
I'll try. I should have brought some with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Look who's next.
I'll be back in 1 second.
All right.
Go right ahead.
Sure.
Greg, we may need just a couple minutes for a transition if you.
Oh, sure.
It looks like we lost
Yeah,
the board
we've
anyway.
already
so
lost. We've lost the
You
quorum.
lost your quorum, so.
Maybe take 5 minutes. You want to take?
Okay, we're going to take 5 grassroots. The hint has been dropped. Hey, wait a minute. Who's in charge here? I didn't. You know what? I think we should take 5 minutes, everybody. Doesn't it get to be my idea? Wait a minute. Where'd everybody go? This is kind of like far-fetched thing with Steve, right? back after our break, and we have got the Pitkin County Broadband Initiative up, and Kara Silbo-Nargle is here to begin.
Yeah, so before I get started with the broadband update, so Kara Silber-Nargle, Manager's Office, I wanted to introduce Alex Sanchez. He is our new best and brightest intern and is here 1 day a week until we move into our new facility, and is going to school at CU Denver and lives in Glenwood. So
Welcome. Really eager to get to know you. This is great. Glad to have you here.
Excited.
Excited to be here as well.
All right.
And you're from Newcastle area?
Yes, was born in Glenwood Springs, actually. Grew up in Sill.
Oh, it's got to come up to
So if you come up to a mic there.
Alex Sanchez was born in Glenwood Springs, grew up in Silt. Have actually worked in the Aspen area, Pitkin County, doing constructions, different construction housing projects. So excited to get into local government.
Wow, great. Well, welcome. Okay.
all right. And then I also have Evan Biaggi here with Mammoth Networks, who is our network operator for the project. So we're before you today. Wanted to give kind of an update of where we are. We came to you guys last fall with this proposal of having a network operator for our broadband initiative, and since then, staff have been working with Mammoth Networks on what we're calling a blueprint to really uncover some of the assumptions that we've been making to know what are the actual costs for us to deploy this broadband initiative. And so we're going to walk you through kind of where we are today, some of the hurdles that we are facing and that any broadband initiative is going to face as we continue to move forward. And really the big question for the board today, there's no key decisions, but just, are we on the right track? Are we taking the right approach as far as being both fiscally conservative, but as well as trying to get broadband out to those rural areas? And you know, one of the things that we've been talking about is really there's a reason that these areas are unserved. There's low-hanging fruit, and then it gets exponentially more expensive, more cost prohibitive to get out to those areas. And that's really what we're here to show you today, is we have a framework for the low-hanging fruit, and as we start to get further out, that's where it becomes more and more difficult. So just to give you, a quick background, is these are the entire Pitkin County Broadband Initiative has remained focused on the Roaring Fork watershed, not just Pitkin County, for two reasons. One, to get to Pitkin County, the only fiber is on I-70, just like the roads. So we need to go through Garfield and Eagle County just to get fiber backhaul up here, as well as, the topography and the barriers that exist is really there is a much greater economies of scale if we look at this from a watershed approach rather than just political boundary approach. And so this map shows what we identified when we did our first needs assessment back in 2014 of there is existing service really along the Highway 82 corridor, a little bit into Snowmass, a little bit south of Carbondale, but really all those drainages off of 82 are those unserved areas that we're trying to get to. And our approach has been to leverage our existing translator for TV and FM to see if we can use those to get to the rural areas. So as we moved forward with the network operator, we looked at kind of what is that three-tier public-private partnership. And really the county's focus has always been that we are the middle mile, that we can bring in the middle mile to reduce the cost and make it more attractive for last mile services to come in. And so where Pitkin County would leverage those core infrastructure sites such as the Elephant Tower, the Crown Tower, using some of the elements with public safety and then leveraging that for last mile. And what we've discussed is bringing in Mammoth Networks as our network operator to really be that that conduit between no pun intended, that conduit between the county's infrastructure and those last mile providers, that they have the expertise, they have the 24/7 service to really be able to keep that high level of performance needed without the county having to try and manage that as well. And so the design that we've been working with is, again, going from that I-70 fiber that exists for the state, leasing that fiber into our microwave middle mile network, which is both for the public safety state digital trunked radio system, as well as then leveraging it for our broadband. And then from that key middle mile infrastructure, that then we can look at tertiary tower sites and really create that last mile down to the home service. And so as we've been working through this blueprint, we've revised what the network is going to look like as we think of what is that foundational framework needed to deploy broadband services. So as we've gone through a few different assumptions, given where we are with some of our tower builds, we've developed this network structure to date. And so I'm going to hand it over to Evan because I think he can speak more eloquently about this. But as you can see, the main ring is the same ring that we've been showing for quite a while, and it's now just how do we take that main ring and expand it out as the next step.
Can I ask a question before you begin? Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Regarding the phasing, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned, some of the assumptions we made last year, of course, had to be changed, and it looks like the scheduling may be certainly a significant factor. So I hope we can touch on that. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, the pressure I get is from people who are in, say, in Old Snowmass or East Aspen, they're saying, okay, where is it? You've been saying it's coming.
Right.
So let's have that, give us an update on that too,
Yeah.
as you get into this. Because I was trying to look at that thinking, okay, where would East Aspen fit into this? Or where does, so you.
If you laid a little bit of that over
more-
top of a map of the county.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might not quite overlay a map, but anyway, so
Yeah.
with that, please go ahead.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me here to give you guys this update. This was a challenge to put this together from a number of reasons, one being phasing. We've got to basically overlay the technology plan with a timeline and come up with something that works for an actual deployable network. It's a little bit difficult to see up on the screen, but there are a couple different colored lines on this network diagram. Some represent microwave, others represent fiber. And what we've tried to do is take the bones, so to speak, the building blocks that have existed with the public safety project, as well as existing fiber and other assets, and marry those together to help create a technical design that can actually function and can meet the needs of the project as a whole. So primary ring is as it has been with the public safety sites. And then if you look down at all the M's down at the bottom, those are what we're calling meet-me centers. And we've come up with a way to interconnect those meet-me centers with fiber optics, and then use those meet-me centers as launch points to get the fiber optic connectivity into the microwave network. Ultimately, from Glenwood Springs, it's not shown here, there will be diverse paths back to Denver, which will allow this entire network to have some resiliency to it with some redundant paths. A couple of things that we've uncovered over time would be in Aspen, originally we had just a single meet-me center location. We've extended that to kind of be a distributed meet-me center, so to speak, where we have 3 different locations. City of Aspen has collaborated on this as well, as there's some benefits to utilizing the data center there as another location. So those 3 in that triangle would act essentially as a virtual Aspen meet-me center when there's actually some physical diversity between those locations. We did come up with primary, secondary, tertiary towers to help define what the roles are of each of those towers. The primary towers, as we've known, have been the ones that primarily have the backhaul between them as part of the public safety project. Secondary towers extend the reach, and tertiary towers are the ones that really get the reach out into the further areas of the county to broadcast that fixed wireless signal. Through our analysis, some of the primary towers actually will not have fixed wireless capabilities. We found some redundancies of having the fixed wireless network at every single tower. We picked the towers that had the best propagation. And there was certainly some overlap there, so that was one of the other design elements that we looked at when we put this together. Phasing was done kind of there was a lot that went into figuring out the phasing. One example is, when will towers be ready to install services? The Sunlight Tower is being built this summer, therefore it could not be in phase one. The physical infrastructure would not be ready until later on in the year, so therefore it was pushed back to phase 3. So there were a number of logistical issues that came up in terms of how this was phased, as well as just realistic deployment, manpower, those types of things also played a role in how this was phased. So, and I think we can go to the phasing one here. So, as it stands right now, we have come up with 4 different phases and assigned different tasks to each of those. We feel that we want to get this moving forward. July of this year, we'd like to have something stood up that, kind of kick the project off. And that would revolve mostly around getting the main microwave backhaul up and running, the Meet Me centers up and running. There's still some work, Crown shelter room conversion, a few other things. Still some secondary site evaluation work would happen in that first phase, but we do feel that our goal would be to have this project moving forward as early as July of this year. Phase 2 is essentially end of summer, so that's really the end of the build season. What else can we get done before the end of the build season here for phase 2? That includes additional fiber and getting the Basalt Meet Me Center up and operational. We can't do that until I guess you guys move out, the Pitkin County offices in June. So, again, there's some things that are, go to creating the different phases. A lot of this wireless stuff is very difficult to do in the middle of winter. Therefore, phase 3 would be July of 2019, and phase 4 would be November of 2019. Our goal is, after these 4 phases are complete, that we really have a foundation for the network. That doesn't mean that after these 2 years the network is done and there won't be anything added to it, but we feel that after the first 2 years, then we can start looking at where do our coverages actually hit, where do we have gaps, how do we augment the coverage with what we're calling tertiary towers to get back even further into drainages, into some of the unserved areas throughout the drainage. So that's our goal. We broke that up. We feel like that 2-year time frame to build the foundation of the network is certainly reasonable.
Yeah, and I would just add on, Greg, and to Evan's point, is that a lot of this has to do with just building up those tower sites. And, we're still in the building from the public safety DTRS system and rebuilding those sites. Like looking at task 4, the lower upper red, we want to get that site up and running, but that is another site now that we have to redevelop. So there's kind of multiple layers that has led to the phasing that we've looked at.
That's the existing Red Mountain Towers locations,
Yeah.
right? Okay, now what about acquiring leases or deals, say with SKICO or whomever for the like? I'm thinking specifically the East Aspen one. Have we figured out how that works yet?
So
where does that get fed from?
That's one of the pieces as we look at, we build this foundation, how can we be opportunistic with the next elements that come up? Trying to get, sites on federal land can take a long time. It's taken a long time even with our existing sites. So to put a new site in an area is going to be very difficult. So where are there landowners that maybe we can be opportunistic that will see our existing sites and relay off to the homeowners? That's what we're looking at. We have looked at working with SKICO on their sites. However, their sites require a new Forest Service lease if we were to actually make broadband come off of them. So it kind of took that out of the short-term mix, and maybe there's landowners or private homeowners that might be a better partner in the short term to actually deploy sooner.
Right, and if you can identify the areas, maybe we can help, or if it comes down to meeting somebody or give names and numbers or contacts or interested parties.
Yeah,
it'd be nice to know.
Absolutely, we're collecting it all right now. As you can see with that task 1 for midsummer, one of the big things is tower ownership, but part of that is also kind of the tower siting. So there's 2 key elements. That one, that location has to be able to look into our existing network, and 2, has to be able to see more than just that one individual household, that there's benefits on both sides.
Sure.
And so that's what we're doing. But yeah, if you guys hear of anyone, shoot them our way. We're kind of taking inventory right now.
Rachel?
Yeah, that kind of brings up some questions for me, but if you could just clarify what the ski company is or isn't doing, because they had previously said it's so important for their guests to be on the mountain, to be able to use their smartphones, but they've run into challenges that they have to get a new lease to be able to put towers on their property. Are they pursuing it at all, or they've just set it aside that they're not going to have cell and wireless service?
Thank you. Let me clarify that.
Thank you.
So, SKICO is still pursuing it. They're doing a pretty aggressive fiber build within their chairlifts and within the areas that they have control over. When I say that it would require a new lease, it's as we looked at partnering to say, for example, can we put broadband last mile antenna on the top of a chairlift that would see into an area. What we uncovered is SKICO's lease for the Forest Service is very specific and does not allow that type of use. And so for us to leverage any of their existing infrastructure still requires an entire new separate lease outside of SKICO's existing lease.
Okay.
And so it's more of a Forest Service. So SKICO is pursuing what they can pursue within their existing lease and permit. But just for us to leverage is a different element with the Forest Service.
I appreciate the more detail. I guess it just seems that I guess they can't do an amendment to their current lease, or if they're not going to take that up, and yet those are some of the key mountains to be able to provide with. I think we should take a look at what we could do. We've had many times when individual representatives come in here with a piece of paper signed by a property owner saying these guys have the right to represent me in pursuing this aspect. And because even if we were working with property owners, unless you've got a few key ones, I can't imagine it's going to be so much lower down. It's not going to get us what we want. And then the whole electricity and power to where the tower is would be, so it starts to sound like investing in something that's not really going to be valuable because we ran into a lease system problem with the Forest Service. And so I'd like to try to think about, well, what are the other ways that we could actually pursue that with them or through them, with their consent to make it really happen. So that's just my 2 cents worth on that one. And then the other one I'm kind of asking is, as we look at the phasing, and I can realize and appreciate how you've built it based on finances and physical factors, construction seasons, and so on, but is there a point at which this is about money? And, Greg, to your phasing question that people ask you, they have to realize we're kind of doing this with no new money. We have some grants we've gotten, and we've been able to do some planning with the translator fund, but we've never gone back to ask the public for more money, which could have potentially get things faster. And you're not dependent on grants for these rebuilds and so on. Right. So that should be a big part of your answer. And then I think we asked the public, could we use the translator fund for planning purposes, designing of broadband, do we need to go back and ask them, can we use it for capital of actual tower construction or anything? Or it's just that it's a limited source and it only feeds so much into this each year?
It's more about the cash flow. We have the permission for design and construction.
And construction. Okay, I wasn't sure if it was just design or not, but okay, thank you.
Steve?
I had a question about the fire station on Snowmass Creek that I'm deducting that it's showing you have one tertiary tower built and it's probably at that fire station. Was that something for improving the public safety because it's a fire station, or was it partly an experiment to do a link off of Williams Hill to another location? Or is it a tower that then would be at some point rebroadcasting broadband out to Gateway Mesa or some neighborhood?
Yeah, so when we evaluated, all the reaches of the county, and we looked for secondary and tertiary sites, we try to take into consider all the different difficulties of doing that. If we had carte blanche to put a tower on top of every mountain here, man, this would sure be easy, but we don't have that. We don't have that ability. So looking for public facilities that can work as collaborators in this project are certainly an easy way to help achieve a goal. So in that particular instance, coming off of Williams would be a primary tower site that could service that old Snowmass, Capitol Creek area. However, the density in that area is such that we need to look at not just putting towers on top of all of the different peaks. We need to get a little bit more dense to serve the type of capacity that we need for all of the customers. So that's a perfect example of a secondary tower that would be close to that population, that we would actually do a link from Williams to that location and then rebroadcast from that fire station. And anybody that could talk to that fire station, we'd want to point them at the fire station. If they couldn't talk to the fire station, then we'd point them up at Williams. And what that does, it gives us another site to basically double the capacity of what we'd be able to service just off of Williams. So as we build this out, we've got the primary towers, which are great for coverage, but they're not ideal for increasing the density and getting the numbers of folks that we need. So we need those secondary towers to augment that. So that specifically for that one would be the reason for looking at that location.
Okay, so it wasn't so much for public safety, just connecting the fire station to...
Correct.
Because that was the only fire station. I looked on the map on the next
and they
slide.
Have, their location is good. They've got an existing building that could be utilized. They have power. All the little things that are needed to create a new transmission location, they have. Mm-hmm. I think there still would be some land use that we'd need to go through to get that approved, but they're a willing party, and certainly they have their own bandwidth needs from a public safety perspective and everything else. That hey, it's a win-win. Now they're a customer on the network as well.
Mm-hmm. What was there any extraordinary cost or anything with doing a tertiary tower at that location? Actually,
the cost of that tertiary tower is probably one of the lower ones because they already have existing, a room that we could carve out some space to put some equipment. They have power there, those types of things. If we're building a new structure from scratch, whether it's, if it has commercial power or not, some of those can be even more costly than using an existing. Or that doesn't have electricity there and
Correct. Doesn't have a building to house equipment and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. So we try to identify as many facilities or locations that we could leverage a little bit of keep our spend down by leveraging the facility to utilize as secondary and or tertiary towers. Mm-hmm. So all in all, we did come up with 12 different towers across the county, and we took that information and we did some pretty in-depth modeling of what the coverage would look like from those towers, and then with the help of your GIS department here, we overlaid that onto where are all of the households that would be covered based off of these locations. And This slide here shows a map of all of those households that would be covered, and they're color-coded by county. Again, like Kara mentioned, this is a watershed project opposed to just a Pitkin County project. Any questions on that slide? That's just a pretty cool graphic. Based on that information, this is where the fun comes, is, man, we did a lot of analysis on the numbers. And we took each of the sites, and this is a little bit of a summarized version of all of the numbers that we came up with. But by each site, we were able to identify how many households in each county could be serviced, how many total households would be serviced off of that coverage, and then we looked at the percentages of coverage within each of those counties. So the number I think that probably your eye is going to go to first on this is, well, what is the percentage of potential coverage for Pitkin County? And based on this initial plan, we're at 82%. The 93% of Eagle County only represents the homes in Eagle County that are part of the watershed, not all of Eagle County, just to make that clarifying note here. So the goal would be, as time goes on, we deploy this initial plan, and as we determine where demand comes from and we have a backbone and a foundational network to work from, we can continue to add tertiary towers to take that number from 82% and move that upward. From here, we came up with some conservative estimates on what would our take rate be from each of these different sites in terms of wireless. And first example is, what would be the take rate from Crown versus Rudeye? Well, Crown has competing service providers in that area that would primarily cover. So we estimated a pretty low take rate for customers coming off of Crown. Opposed to Rudeye, there was a much higher take rate in those areas, but unfortunately the expected total household is lower because that tower simply doesn't have the density that the Crown Tower does. So we used this methodology and used that in building a very comprehensive cost model and projection for what our total revenues would be for this entire project, which we can talk about next unless you guys have any questions on.
Well, just
coverages
one last one. On Elephant, you're only predicting 40%, and that is kind of one of the larger groups of rural Pitkin residents. Why did that seem to rate so low compared to people, really getting service finally up in Rudeye and Thomasville?
Yeah, there is competition up there. CenturyLink does have DSL services up there, and there is another competing wireless provider that has services in that area.
Okay.
So it is not completely unserved. It may be considered underserved.
Okay.
Which is why we came up with that number.
Thank you.
And again, we tried to be conservative.
Sure. Because
we want to make sure that the numbers that we use here that funneled into the rest of the model don't
you don't want to be too optimistic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yep.
Craig?
Sure, Steve.
Looking on this chart here, I've been thinking, how can Eagle and Garfield County help pay for this whole system? And in fact, Commissioner John Martin from Garfield County was talking to me about having a discussion about the Sunlight Tower, how they can participate more in that. And when you look at this chart, how many Garfield residents get a signal off of Sunlight, that basically we're paying for the bulk of it right now. Maybe they're chipping in some, I'm not sure. And the Eagle County residents really benefit from the Crown. And so that would be a good place to ask them to put in money to support those specific sites. And this just shows our justification for asking the counties to chip in some money on that. So John?
Yeah, so Steve, we've started, we've opened up conversations at the staff level with both Garfield County and Eagle County. Both of those counties right now are at different places in what they are doing with broadband, and so I think our partnerships may look different as a result of that. But right now at the staff level, we're working with Eagle County. We are going to target actually going to their board. Hopefully, we're hoping at the staff level that we will have reached some agreement on a potential partnership that we can bring to both boards this spring, early spring. I think we were targeting as early as March. Assuming that our staff discussions continue to go apace as they have been. Garfield County is working through an RFP right now, similar to what we did to look at network operator. We think that there's opportunity on the Crown to either share infrastructure or provide the service, and so we've had that conversation about, we should be having a discussion about sharing the cost on infrastructure and such there on, I'm sorry, Crown and Sunlight, and so
I didn't, somewhat on the Crown too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those discussions have been opened. I'd imagine that because Garfield County is going through a similar process that we are, what we conclude is the right partnership there is going to be different from Eagle County, which will probably be a cost-sharing relationship.
And I had a couple other thoughts on that too. The fact that we got the DOLA grant to do a lot of this, and it's kind of covering really parts of 4 counties. So they're, in a sense, the state's helping us to provide service to more than just Pickens County residents. But then the other thought I had was when individual households start subscribing to the last mile service for their broadband, we would be getting some of that money back on the 5% or something that Pickens County gets from that.
Well, one of the dilemmas that you will have is that some of that infrastructure has been subsidized through Pickens County taxes, through the translator. And so the challenge there is if we don't have taxpayers from the other entities also contributing, do you have to have a differential rate so that you can collect back some more?
So they might be paying a higher rate than Pickens County residents?
Well, that would be one option. Another option would be to ask for capital contributions so that the Pickens County tax base isn't subsidizing the Eagle or Garfield County tax base. I think Mammoth would challenge us that if our differentials are too much, the take rates might be lower than they otherwise would be, but you also have that subsidy issue. We're hoping to eliminate all of that by simply having an agreement with the other jurisdictions that makes it equitable for everyone and gets everyone the services they want.
So then every subscriber would have the same rate?
That would be our goal.
Be the ideal.
And I think we have the best chance at getting the uptake then of subscribers. If we can address the question of Pickens County taxpayers subsidizing others through a contribution or sharing infrastructure, whatever that may be, that's the conversation we're having right now.
Okay, good.
Great. Rachel, anybody else? Keep going.
See the next one.
Next.
Now the fun one.
Yeah, this is the fun one. This one has dollar signs all over it. So just a synopsis of what this summary is the first couple years require a significant amount of capital for the tower rebuilds, tower builds, equipment, you name it. And during those first couple years, our subscriber base is starting at 0 and growing. So we have this inverse relationship where you're spending a lot of money and you don't have a lot of revenue for the first couple years. However, we feel that with the model that we've put together, That starts to turn in year 3. And between year 3 and 4, this thing does start cash flowing, where we've, we did a cumulative net revenue here, where the cumulative actually goes above where the debt was during the first 3 years. In any model where you have a monthly subscriber base, that's how this is. It's a monthly recurring revenue, and it builds over time. And we have to reach critical mass to get to a point where it overcomes the investment that it's going to require to put into this project. So there are a couple things here that we've estimated. And if you look at the total fixed revenue line, 2018 is very conservative because we're just getting out of the gates and we don't have the sites up and running. 2019, we're still building, and we're adding more of those secondary sites and tertiary sites in 2019 that are feeding the more rural and underserved areas. But then by 2020, and then we go stagnant at 2021 and 22 in our modeling. That's that ramp up on the wireless revenues. We also have some other revenues that we feel would come in the form of connecting anchor institutions and other wholesale connections. We're not sure where this is going to go, but a lot has changed since we sat here in the fall in terms of discussions that we've had as we've gotten out in the community and people know more about this project. Things have started to really open up, and more folks are saying, well, hey, why don't we help? Can you guys help us get connectivity over here, or how would we work as a partner with you? So we've had a lot of those conversations, and we try to be conservative on this other revenues. Certainly that number could grow significantly higher as well as this project continues to take some shape. The other thing that I want to point out in this summary here is that we do have a number in there for grant revenue, and that number is roughly equivalent to some of the equipment expenses for the fixed wireless equipment. And we will be and are looking at various grant dollars in order to help fulfill that need to help make this model sustainable. And there's certainly some avenues out there that could be potentials, and we're trying to explore all of those so that we can start at least with a little bit of a cushion there.
And I'd also note that these numbers do not include any partnership revenues that we just spoke about. And so if we're successful in concluding some of those partnerships, this comes down. And really the challenge then is a really 2-year cash flow issue, because the real cash flow issue is in 2018, 2019. It goes positive in 2020. Net, it goes positive in 2021. And so there could be, if it's a cash flow issue, there could, under this model, be payback coming as early as 2020 towards those deficits and completed in 2021. And obviously, if we draw down any revenues or contributions from our partner counties, this model changes significantly.
Yeah. I think that you're considering then we would be cash flowing with general fund.
In the absence of other revenue sources, we'd probably be looking to cash flow using fund balance, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm wondering whether it'd be worth exploring whether there's a certificate of participation model based on the tower values and things like that might be worth pursuing, or might just not because of the interest in.
Yeah, I think what the real barrier to that is at these costs is the issuance costs against this
small.
kind of debt just drives the true interest rate up a lot. And so what I suspect, Rachel, as we further refine this model, that cash flow need is going to go down, and that it's going to be and if it does go down, it actually probably becomes a 1-year kind of cash flow issue, which is easier for us to absorb at a lower dollar amount.
The other thing, I guess there's two I wanted to kind of check in on, but when we first started this, and we did an awful lot of surveying and discussing of consumer needs and price points. But by the time we really are go lit, will we be able to keep price points the same as we were projecting 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
This model was based on providing a 25 meg down, 3 meg up service at $70 to the end user. Okay. And we used a $70 average rate, assuming that we may have a lower cost entry level plan and maybe a super plan that's higher. Okay. But that our average cost per wireless consumer was at $70 is what these numbers were based on.
Okay, so we're starting to think that will hold and should hold.
Yeah.
And anecdotally, what I've heard from various residents throughout the county is while costs still have gone up maybe with competitors, that costs and speeds have gone up, and so we're still looking to provide that base, or not base, but that average model, that it still is competitive with others, not so low that we can't afford it, but not so high that it's right in line, but that we are still pretty aggressive. And anecdotally, what I've heard from other residents that are getting some of the fixed wireless is that package is still a value add package.
Okay, and so I would just imagine that if additional revenues come in or grants or whatever, as this project turns cash flow positive, that starts to become a maintenance fund and a tertiary tower fund for the additional towers.
That would be the hope, right?
Okay. And I guess we're not there yet, but at one point, I'd like to see kind of the parallel of what's our marketing plan. How are we going to roll it out? What are we going to do for marketing? Yeah. So.
Just wondering how long will 25 and 3 be the appropriate download, upload numbers?
That's a great question. That's why we didn't model this out to 10 years. It's this industry moves so fast, and I've seen generation after generation. I mean, 1.5 megabit on a T1 used to be the greatest thing ever, and it's hard to say how long that's going to be viable. We are building in as much scalability and capacity into this network as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, with the additional towers, we create a more dense network, and that's really what's going to help us achieve 25, 50 meg and greater speeds to the end customers. If we had one tower trying to service the entire county, you're splitting up that bandwidth across a lot, greater number of participants. So it will be important to continue to look at secondary, tertiary tower sites, not only from a coverage perspective, but also from a throughput perspective and a capacity perspective, as that speed tier becomes obsolete and we need to go up to a 50 meg package, let's say.
So this is really a living system.
It's
not going to be done when it's done. It's never going to be done.
Unfortunately, no.
Unfortunately not. This will be an ever-growing system.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great. I just had one question on the microwave. If you happen to be in line or approximate to the microwave, can you tie into that if you have the proper?
The microwave network is strictly a point-to-point network.
Okay.
So it is designed to talk from one dish to another dish. The networks, the LTE-based system that we're planning on deploying here is what they call a point-to-multi-point network, where you have one access point and then multiple people can talk to that. And they're greatly different in terms of the way that they function.
Got it.
So the microwave network is truly what we're considering the middle mile backhaul between the primary towers, as opposed to the LTE, which is the distribution.
Right. Okay. But you couldn't, if you happen to be near it, you're not gonna get a bump.
And the beam width is really small on those. So you'd have to be at the top of Loge with another antenna there just to pick that up.
Got it.
So.
Okay. What's next? Yep, Rachel.
Yeah, well, just a couple of things, just not to blur the lines too much here, but as we all know, there's a broadband bill that's been introduced to try to move more money from the hard-to-serve telephone fund into broadband deployment fund. And it came in as a clean bill to the Senate, but then a lot of amendments were added primarily by industry. And at the CCI discussion last week on Thursday, we directed our staff to write a letter of all those concerns and deliver it directly to the governor, not have calls to the governor as much as outlining those. And I think the motion was also sent to the Denver Post and to others as well. But one of the items is actually the speed, and the current statute defines broadband network as having a speed of 4 megabytes per second downstream, 1 megabyte per second upstream, or at measurable speeds at least equal to the Federal Communication Commission's definition of high speed internet access, whichever is faster. So the Senate bill raises the downstream speed to 10, but strikes the FCC definition of broadband, and ostensibly this was done to ensure that most underserved communities would be prioritized for grant funding, but the fear is that by lowering the definition of broadband speeds, the industry will only be implementing those older dial-up copper type speeds across rural areas. And there's also problems with forbidding you from getting one grant if you've gotten a grant from another source, or even if it wasn't a grant to your project, it was a grant to the schools in your county, things like that. So I don't know if we're going to get anywhere with that bill actually being meaningful or not. The real fear is they just want to do something about broadband, and they're going to pass something. And then once they've done that, they very rarely will ever go back and correct it in future years. It's like, we did broadband last year, so we're good enough. So we're just hammering away on that, and we'll need to continue to do so. But kind of concurrently, this new issue of the National Association of Counties talks about the new changes at the FCC, which are being promoted again by industry. And as it says, at the holiday break in December, despite 9 months of deliberation, a single industry representative completely rewrote the draft municipal code at the 11th hour and submitted it to the board. So the local government reps have resigned from that committee in protest, and it is, again, to allow industry to cherry pick the dense areas and leave rural communities out on their own. And so we're going to need to do a little more lobbying on that side of it as well. So it's odd that as much as you're sitting there trying to help your citizens, your economic development, your healthcare transmission of information, schooling and education opportunities, the industry and people who receive campaign contributions from them are out there trying to make this the worst possible bill and the least possible access for the communities that need it the most. So I'm very frustrated by the whole deal, but we are hammering away, and I appreciate your efforts. And it is just shifting ground underneath us. And so I do think we need to proceed. Our public needs the support. I'm willing to take the cash flow risk, but we need to do everything we can lobbying on the sides to make sure that others aren't killing our project with good intentions.
Yeah, and one thing we've looked at is, as I said at the beginning, is this is the foundation. It's only going to get harder, and they're unserved for a reason. And everything that's happening, the grant dollars are going to be even more critical as we move forward, because they're the same ones that had the high-cost telephone fund. These are the rural, unserved areas, and so it's only going to continue to go uphill.
Very good.
But we're ready to tackle it.
We have to remind people that remoteness is an advantage.
Yes.
Okay, what's next? We've got about 10 more minutes.
Just the kind of where we're at and where we're headed is to continue the big construction projects that we have for this year is finishing up Elephant, Sunlight, and Root Eye. That's kind of the key ones that we're working on. In addition to, I should also have up there the Meet Me centers in Basalt and Aspen. Those are also kind of where staff are focusing our efforts on the construction infrastructure side of things. And then we're continuing, as John mentioned, to pursue partnerships through different elements of the project with City of Aspen, Eagle County, Garfield County, are talking to other community anchor institutions that, as we've gotten out, are interested in the resiliency that we are building, which is partially why we tackled this. and really looking at the different funding mechanisms, potentially a DOLA proposal, the translator, and general fund as we come into the budget season, to really be able to plan out for the next years. So the key questions, which I think I've heard from the board, is really, are we on the right track? And that, as you said, Greg, this is a living project. It's not, there's no point B where we get to call it complete. Maybe in a few years, but I don't know if 100% is ever going to be there. So.
Right. I was going to say, if there's ever an opportunity to put a map down and look at in detail and start thinking, I'm sure you already have been, but if identifying the ideal spot for the tertiary towers and start working on that, even if it's a couple or 3 or more years out, there's no time like the present to at least start honing in on, what would be the ideal location.
And we have a lot of that information.
You must, yeah. That's where you'd have to start. I guess I'd just like to see it at some point.
It's going to be on the entire backside of the new building. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. The big map with little lights that come on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for us here?
Nope, that's it.
Thanks for coming in, then. It's a good update. Everyone's eager to see it and keep moving. If you get stuck at some point with something, you'll let us know, right?
Yep, we'll be back. We'll be
I'm
back
ready to send my check in to subscribe.
All right.
We're getting there.
Cash flow.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Kara. Okay, and
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if maybe you guys want to go. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm wondering if you might want to just do future agendas, since we have kind of a set appointment afterwards, and maybe you'll get a little bit longer break.
There you go. You want to just hit that
Or
right
get
now?
out earlier.
Well, you've got an interview that we probably
Well,
can't
I know we
change.
have the interview, but I mean, we could do open discussion or even legislative updates while Kara's here. Rather
Are
than,
you ready for legislative updates?
Sure.
And she's back.
I mean, that's all I'm thinking is free
sure.
Kara up if we could do so.
Sorry to preempt. I just thought we could cram something else in.
Did you notice that I was starting to drift?
Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
So fortunately we have Alex Sanchez on board too, who's going to start helping out with some of the legislative updates. But really, I think, Rachel, you probably have a few more major updates to share after CCI, but the big one is that we are watching Senate Bill 2, the High Cost Mechanism Fund, really because of the implications for our project and for rural communities across the state, and how that affects both for providers as well as for local entities. And then the other one that has come up is, as you are aware, President Trump came out with his budget proposal, which slashed both healthcare funding as well as public lands. And so we are working with Wilderness Workshop to come up with a joint letter about some of our concerns in the slashing of funding of public lands and how detrimental that is to our community. And so those are the key elements that we're following this week. So that's a brief one.
A couple of other ones. You already heard our comments earlier about broadband, and I would just say, I think sending a letter of our concerns doesn't hurt. It's kind of adding on to what CCI is doing. I think that if something good gets to a certain point, we'd probably ask CCAT to weigh in on it, but it was not one of the 3 CCAT priorities, and there's limited budget in terms of resources and how many bills we follow with that group. It's transportation, healthcare, and healthcare.
Telecommunications.
No, it's not telecommunications. Affordable housing.
Right.
For this session. But again, I think there's a point at which we could weigh in, but it's not something to just ask suddenly to do who don't understand all those issues. But between Eric's letter that has gone out, or I just sent to ask him if there was a final version of that versus the one that was being proofed over the weekend. that we could, send along as well. I think people are really reaching out to their senators and letting people know this bill isn't going to help us. Even the West Slope senators who were supportive, but the industry lobby is absolutely really strong. So I think, I don't know that we would have to see it again as much as a letter coming out from Pickens County with the concerns that you're aware of, that it's really going to hinder educational, economic, all those opportunities for rural regions. Maybe not so much us as others that really hurts.
Rachel, can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Were you planning to testify, or is anyone planning to testify if that goes?
Not this week. I'm not going down there this week. I don't even know when. There was some potential movement of laying it over because of the protests we're starting to make, and they may give it a little more time before they actually hear it in the House. The logic was, well, if we can just get it out of the Senate, we can fix it in the House, but we don't seem to be seeing much fix going on there. So Eric had said that the number one priority of people dealing with this was the speeds. Certainly there's other issues with whether you're really served when they measure you by census blocks and just one person has service, so they say the whole census block is served, and a census block can go 5 miles out into the rural area, to have that. So there's a lot of issues with this bill that's not very helpful. The other one to bring forward is to let the board know that Dylan Roberts, who was a replacement for Diane Mitch Bush over in the Route kind of area, dipping into a little bit of our valley with Eagle County, he has reintroduced the bill that Diane and Millie Hamner ran last year to offer a stipend of support for people between 400 and 500% of poverty level. On the exchanges, after 400%, you do not get a subsidy, but you deal with the high rates. And, it's hard to say, again, whether this bill will make it through Senate Finance and things like that. It did make it through the House before. It's likely to be a $6 million cost this year versus last was 5.7. And it really covers almost all of Colorado except for the Big 10 counties on the Front Range who are having these problems with higher rates. So it's of benefit to Crowley County and Yuma as much as to Pitkin and Garfield. And we've talked before, I think I sent a small email. What was most surprising for the whole board to understand is that CCI voted unanimously to support it this year. And last year, CCI was in a monitor position. Maybe that motion came forward with a sense that it's going to get killed anyhow, let's be friendly. But I think that we're starting to see a real change of some attitudes and operations at CCI because of CCAT, frankly. A little more, let's work together, let's see what's good for everyone. And, the Weld County Commissioner was the one who made the motion to support and said, CCI is supposed to be about counties helping counties, so let's support this. Whereas last year, the discussion was more about, well, if this money's coming out of the general fund, it's not fair, and things like that. So, yeah, it's good. It's a very good movement, and so I'd like to see us support that again. I have Catherine has reserved a car for me to be able to go down, but I'm going to have to see what the weather's like because I do have to fly back out of Aspen the next day for NACO. So that is, but if we could get even that minor bit of relief for our residents, it'd be wonderful. And I think Nan has older statistics, or Karen, about how many people in our region, our county, fall into that kind of fiscal cliff. We're still waiting, but we'll see the one geographic rating system introduced, and then we will later see the reinsurance proposal introduced. And a lot of people are thinking that the reinsurance proposal has legs, has the greatest legs, and they're kind of struggling to figure out how would you pay for that. It would be a benefit to all Colorado residents, whether you're on the exchange or not, in terms of helping bring down private insurance rates. And so that's Chris Kennedy is leading that up, and Dan Gibbs will be the point person for that from CCAT and just the past group of commissioners and citizens he's gotten together to testify on these issues. We've been running this up and down the flagpole, different measures, for about 3 or 4 years now, and since rates are coming up in the Front Range significantly, we're finally seeing a little bit more interest. The last legislative item I'd like to update everyone on, and then if there's any questions, is that the 1177 Basin Roundtables were told at the last Basin Roundtable meeting that there would be no replenishment of their grant funds come July fiscal year starting. And that's all the basins, South Platte, Gunnison, Arkansas, Pitkin, this one. And the total amount that goes to those basins is a little over $10 million. And it's just critical for their work to go forward. We've spent 10 years getting to know each other as roundtables and our needs, and studying the state gap and developing the basin, the statewide water plan, and then from there the basin implementation plans of what's needed most in your basin. And then these grant funds are what keep those things going forward, whether it's ranchers who are lowering their intakes to still be able to get water off a river that's depleted, or stream restoration, or things like that. And so hearing that news that they were not going to be funded, and the background on that is that it's a severance tax issue. Severance tax is the only source of funding for the Department of Natural Resources. Severance tax revenues have been very low to the state, primarily because they let companies deduct all their property taxes first, and then they get to say what they owe the state. So anyhow, that is the problem. And what we're trying to say pretty clearly is that we don't want to see the basin's funding come away from the construction bill, the project bill that CWCB always grants, and I think that one's already been kind of outlined what's going to be in it. So obviously basins that have projects in the construction fund don't want to see anything knocked off there just to fund the basin roundtables. But separate from that, particularly during the recessionary periods, the state swept severance tax revenues repeatedly from severance tax counties, and they all would like to see the basin roundtables funded. So it's kind of a basic point. I think the River District and others have actually done the work to see how much severance tax had been swept from water, and I can forward that to you, from water interest, from CWCB. But again, I think a lot of those severance tax counties look at the whole severance tax that was swept in terms of no local grants and no dollar disbursements that way, to feel that this $10 million should come from the general fund from Colorado to fund this, to keep it going at least for a one-year basis at the same level as was funded last year. So not asking for any inflationary increase or anything. And it's just, up until a few weeks ago, we could say we were looking at a drought. And you can't cut back water planting in time of drought, but even with these snowfalls, I'm not saying our soil moisture is back up to normal or it's going to be a great year. You just can't tell. So anyhow, I have worked with QQ, has agreed to send a letter of support for this already. I've gotten this to Jim Pokrant to have the Next Steps Committee of the Basin Roundtable look at it and potentially send it out to other Basin Roundtables. I've talked to Bob Rankin and Millie Hamner, who are in the JBC, about the issue, and I've sent the letter, the kind of one-pager I've put together about it, to Christine Durand, the Speaker of the House, and I'm just trying to get it out to more and more reps and senators and groups who can endorse this concept. I don't know if it'll be too late, but once you get into April, you start to get pretty close on the budget. But I believe that Wednesday, the 25th, and this is a date you guys would be interested in, Wednesday, the 25th of April, they're going to call a 4-basin roundtable meeting, and there hasn't been one of those since, I don't know, 2014 or so, maybe a little after that. And so that would be, Gunnison, Yampa, Colorado, and one other basin, just the 4 West Slopes basins, to kind of touch base and see where we're at. And I'm hopeful that they would do similarly, pass a resolution or send a letter saying it's critically important to continue this water planning work. Just briefly, our basin, I think we have people who drive in from Grand County to go to Glenwood Springs, come in from Winter Park, come in from, all over Montrose area. These people aren't going to keep driving hundreds of miles and give up a day for a group that just sits around and talks, and there's no grant funds left available to actually make their work meaningful. And just to lose the momentum at this point in time would just be really sad. So that's the other kind of side legislative thing I've been working on. It's not CCAT and it's not CCI, but I have met CCI commissioners all aware of it and have brought it up to them.
When's the Basin Roundtable meeting?
It's going to be Wednesday the 25th, and this is a little awkward. QQ was planning to have a retreat on the 26th and 27th. We're a little soft on that date now because it looks like there's some other major water meeting that's going to happen in Denver over those 2 days. I have to find out, and we have to see if enough people would come to our retreat versus the Denver meeting. But QQ is transitioning. I think it's fair to say Barbara Green and Lane are thinking about less hours and moving back. And, you know, I'm termed out. Other leaders in that group are termed out or retiring from their jobs. And so we're really trying to have a day-and-a-half QQ retreat at some point to think about future structure of that organization and kind of go over the past, why it was formed, what it's gotten done through Northwest COG, and then what our challenges are and where we need to go with it in the future.
When's that meeting on the 25th?
Well, the 25th is going to be all day. It's probably, I don't have it to be
9 a.m. or
determined. It's
something.
probably going to be Grand Junction and probably from like 9 to 4 for the all basin meet. The QQ retreat, if it goes forward on the 26th and 27th, is going to be in Eagle.
Right.
So we're just kind of working those out. But I think those are all the major bills. The aquatic nuisance species bill seems to be moving forward pretty well with no real issues. The amount of money from the tags I think they would raise is only about $2.4 million, and the cost of everyone's inspection programs are closer to $4 million. And so that still will leave a gap, and we're not sure how that funding will be allocated, whether it hits places like Rudi or not. In some ways, they take care of the bigger reservoirs, water delivery reservoirs to the Front Range first, like Grand County, Grand Lake. But there is some discussion that they might add $1 to all the licenses for fishing to cover that gap. So we'll see if that is what happens after that.
Okay. Greg? Oh, Steve, yeah.
I have one issue, and it's non-legislation, actually. There was a bill being brought forward having to do with closed landfills in Colorado. CDPHE has come up with proposed rule changes on managing the closed landfills in the state. And so there's kind of a working group working through CCI that is looking at the issue, and I had just sent to John today, forwarded to him the CDPHE rules, but I think we should take a look at them. It could affect us in the future if we have a closed landfill. It could potentially affect us in terms of the Island Park
The older one.
dump.
That's in the city now. I think we gave
That's the city, but it still could affect us. There's also an old dump by the town of Basalt dump along the Emma Road that maybe is in Eagle County, but it might be in Pickens County, I'm not sure. But the state does have, CDPHE does have a list of 135 closed landfills in the state, and we should check that list out and see if there's anything that affects us immediately that this rulemaking would have an impact on us, and maybe we'd want to weigh in on the whole process for rules that could affect us in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can come back with that information for you guys.
Okay, great. Where are we now? Now it's 3:11 already. Do we need a break?
Jeffrey is here if we
do
want
the
to do
interview and then
the
take a-
interview.
Yeah, okay, great idea. This is Jeffrey. Wonderful. Citizen Board interview for P&Z. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks for your time.
Got you in ahead of schedule. Okay. Where do we start? Welcome. Thanks for flying. Appreciate it.
So Jeffrey, typically the chairman asks the first
do I ask
question, but I'll jump in.
Let Steve ask the
Jeffrey,
first
why
question,
why
sorry.
are you interested in serving on the P&Z?
I know.
What's your big motive?
I spent the last year serving on the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus Board. So I'm very familiar with site plan and activity reviews, which is part of the responsibility of P&Z. Additionally, I'm pretty familiar with the rest of P&Z's responsibilities. I sat through a few meetings as per my responsibilities in the caucus, including getting the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus Plan recently approved by P&Z and then forwarded on to BOCC. So I'm pretty familiar with the activities, and I have had other sort of civic duties within the caucus as well as within Pitkin County. So it seems like a reasonable step for me to take personally and professionally.
Great. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you for applying, and you have quite the extensive and impressive resume, so appreciate that, and the time that this would take. Let me ask you, do you see conflict between your role as an architect and the potential of the county looking at appropriate FARs for new construction?
I think from my standpoint, I'm an educated person, potential person on the P&Z board. If there was anything that looked like it was a conflict, I would certainly remove myself from any proceeding.
Okay. I guess I wasn't referring as directly to a conflict of interest, but I appreciate your response to that. And I don't know where things will go or not,
Yeah.
but there have been some discussions with our board about transferable development rights, and should it take more than, the 2 or 3 to get up to your maximum size, maybe make the second TDR you purchase worth less on the same site, or others have just said, maybe just less TDRs in general. So again, it's more of a general philosophy discussion that may create changes in code. Again, I don't know if it'll go forward or not. Would you see that sort of as a potential conflict with clients you may have in the future, and I guess I hate to say it this way, but maximizing FARs available versus what's best for the community for house sizes?
I think I should add to why I'd want to be on P&Z. The addition, and I'll come back to your
Answer
question,
it any way you'd like,
which is, I think the balance is not just can we max out FAR for a client, but it's really what are the water resources, what are the other land resources around it, and so I'm not coming with a presupposed outcome, if you will, that I've already decided 15,000 square feet sounds great.
Right.
But we certainly work with clients who are looking for every available square foot within their envelope or within city guidelines if they're transferring from a historic site. So I see myself playing both sides, if you will. If I'm representing a client, then they're looking to build every square foot they possibly can. But I'm also looking at water usage, looking at land usage, and caught the end of your last conversation. The biggest concern within the caucus, or even within my neighborhood, is we don't have the water available.
Yeah.
So I'll just give you an anecdote. It's not necessarily my opinion, but we took 2 1-acre parcels and combined them into one, and sterilized the tap on the second one, and that seemed like a really good move for the homeowner, as well as for in this case for Gateway, and for it's fewer claims on that same amount of water.
One more of the tougher questions.
The easy ones up front.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to give people a chance to address these things. We all know affordable housing is quite the issue in our community, our valley, our state. And we as a county have far less resources than the city does. But the question of urban growth boundaries continues to come up. Is it are they valuable? Should we bust them loose? Is the housing so needed that other areas should we expand the urban growth boundaries around Aspen or around Basalt or these other areas, or do you support those in forcing the housing as a kind of brownfield infill?
It's interesting. I'm working on a project in another valley. I'll come back to your question again. And they're required, if they're doing an EHU or employee housing unit, to actually build that first. So it's on site. It's within the setbacks. It goes through the same sort of requirements that the desired house, if you will, that the developer is looking to do. And there's something really both plausible and laudable about that. It's not tucked down. It's not, they didn't get exemptions, if you will, to go higher or
Right.
move the housing elsewhere. And, you know, I think it's a good model. It's, you know, it's one, this is in an area of Vail that's called HDMF, High Density Multifamily. So it's combining the high density with the employee in one site. And so, again, I don't have a presupposed outcome in terms of, you know, what I think is best for the county. But I'm seeing how it's working in other, you know, in other districts and other towns.
Yeah, you know, I'm a little surprised we don't have anybody from ComDev here. Usually when people are applying for a board, you know, so we can double check questions with them of our own understanding of code.
Might be because we're doing it early.
I thought we were just kind of right on time.
We're ahead of schedule.
No, we were scheduled for
15 minutes
3:30 at this, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So they
I
may
see.
be
Show up
coming
right
still.
at the end.
Let's up right at the end. You know, because I was
took
kind of
Grafton. I'm on time.
Yeah, we don't really have employee dwelling units associated
Yeah.
with the free market homes because before I got on the board, there was a decision made that we don't want hundreds of cars and employees commuting into Aspen from the rural areas of the county as opposed to a mitigation fund, which we're looking at whether those fees are appropriate. So I guess it is true. It's not so much big subdivision proposals and, you know, the type of thing we're seeing Mid-Valley of, you know, trying to create new code entirely for villages or this or that. But I don't think our policy is currently for a lot of individual units attached to free markets. The problem in many ways has become what they get used for in the long term. It's guest house and not affordable housing. Okay, so those are my tough questions, UGB and FARs.
Steve, you're up next.
I was thinking about if there would be potential conflict with you being on the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus Board as well as the P&Z Board. And it's not without precedence having somebody on both boards. At one point, John Howard was served in both positions. I think eventually he resigned from the caucus board because he was spending so much time on the P&Z things. But while he was in that dual role, he was able to keep the caucus very well informed about what the P&Z was doing. But do you see any potential conflicts, or how would you handle conflicts if there was, you know, between the two positions?
Yeah, I've probably been on about a half dozen land use and site activity reviews over the past year as part of the land use committee. I did join Snowmass Capitol Creek Board primarily for my interest in water and what was going on with transbasin water use within the valley. So that was really the focus getting on. I turned into working both on communications, building the website, and doing the land use reviews. But with the master plan sort of in place already, I'd like to turn back to water. So I think the answer to your question is I can easily recuse myself, if you will, from the land use activity and move, you know, back to sort of more of an advocate for Snowmass Capitol Creek, both water use as well as some potential surveys that we're doing going forward. So I don't see it as a conflict.
Yeah, and it might be at a caucus meeting might be when you would actually recuse yourself if both boards were going to be looking at the same issue, if it did look like there was going to be a conflict. So the Planning and Zoning Board does it's a pretty big time commitment for those that serve on the board. And do you feel like you have the time to put into it, or are you aware of the kind of the time commitments that exist there?
Having read the 160-page filings that usually come with site use and activity reviews, aware of the pre-reading. Again, I've only attended one P&Z, and I've listened to the BOCC meetings via television. Thank you. So I have a pretty good understanding of what the sort of the pre-commitment to having a successful meeting is, and I think balanced with my other board duties as well as my professional responsibilities, I'm ready to take it on.
Mm-hmm. Well, we certainly do appreciate you applying for this position. It's really one of the most important boards, I think, in the whole county of our citizen advisory board. So
Thank you.
appreciate you applying for it.
Thanks for your time. Yeah, and I appreciate Rachel's question earlier that I will admit I have not read all of the land use code. I read what's relevant generally to a project.
It's a pretty dense
yeah.
bit of reading. I was just going to ask one other question. You're relatively new in the Valley, 4 years. How do you feel you've absorbed Pitkin County culture or land ethics or values? How would you, what is your impression of the area, why you're here, and how would you want to continue those good qualities, perhaps?
Yeah, I settled in the area from Denver and Boulder, so I've been in the state a quarter of my life, so I am a Coloradan, technically. From a Pitkin County standpoint, I looked at over 40 homes to move here, from almost Glenwood to Old Snowmass. And there was something about Pitkin County, about sort of the rural nature of where I live, of just the day-to-day. There's something absolutely, stunning about living here. So this is home, and I continue to see, how can I make an improvement to where I live. I think Gateway, Little Elk Creek, Lazio, that whole neighborhood is spectacular. The backyard that we have, that neighbors BLM land. I wish I could go skiing campground and skin up if someone would give me access to their driveway. But the short answer to your question is, it's a stunning place to live. And so I feel like I've made this home, and in a couple of years, already serving on 2 nonprofit boards, as well as my activity within my own firm. I feel like I'm beginning to contribute locally. And I think your question was really, do I get Pitkin County? I think personally I have the best world. I do the reverse commute every day. I never bring my car into this city. I think Raft is the best thing in the world. I thank the bus driver every time it snows and there's someone else behind the wheel. But the arts, the culture, as well as sort of the scenic outdoors, the rural outdoors, it's, coming from the Front Range, I've been able to find a lot of everything I had there within this county.
And you're still working with Harry Teague Architects?
Yeah, I've been with Harry for about 2.5 years. I actually met him as an intern, as a graduate student, and continuing to work on some amazing projects, both in Aspen as well as Snowmass and Basalt, and currently in Vail.
Okay, so, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
So Jeff, I was thinking, I'm looking at your resume, it's very impressive, just your range of experience you've had in finance and in some esoteric things. You've got woodworking and you've got some writing. You've got so much in there. The architecture and to hear about your interest in water is really gratifying. And I don't know if we've talked. I think we met down in Basalt, right?
Bill and Bettina's.
Bill and Bettina's place. And I was thinking, the undercurrent for me lately, talking about housing and building, where we're going, and Steve I know has an interest, and Rachel as well, is what are we doing with energy efficiency? And we have 2 great examples of net zero in our valley already. Right. And sometimes I think what we need to do is find like-minded folks and let's just set the bar higher, at least set the goal sometime in the future for net zero as a standard. Yeah. And you're a bit of an expert on this already. I can see from your background. I'd be interested in hearing what you think of that as is that a reasonable expectation to announce to the world now, or do we have to cook that one a bit longer? And could you contribute to that somehow? This is net zero water and power, right?
So I have worked with Corps over the last year as well as I'm the lead rep on Snowmass Base Village Building 6. So I'll touch on water first. Again, I think we're just kicking the bucket on that one right now. Horrible analogy, but the trans-basin connection between Snowmass and Snowmass Village, I think, is irksome. There's no guarantee, or there's sort of an annual guarantee from Snowmass that they will maintain minimum in-stream flows within Snowmass Creek, and so that's on my radar scope. On the energy side, we in the last year, we as in Harry Teague Architects, Snowmass Base Village, East-West Partners, have all we've I think I personally did it, but we filed a core grant that would help reduce the energy consumption of Sunwest Base Village Building 6, the community building, and there will beat ASHRAE by 26%. So it's not a net zero building, but core came in to help finance and fund the PV array. We're now at, in the valley, PV is less than 50 cents on the dollar out of pocket between core, Excel, and the U.S. government. And so, yeah, it's a wonderful time to be having this conversation. Recently introduced Chris Collins of the McKay branch to core because the monastery is already off the grid. Wouldn't it be nice then if we hit McKay branch? Now 2 neighbors are net zero electricity. Could we then approach Little Elk Creek or Gateway and John McBride and say, okay, you're the 3 holdouts and your neighboring BLM land, can we lease land from the BLM and then make those neighborhoods net zero? So it's a pipe dream at this point, but the conversation started. So yes, I think we can get to net zero energy. I don't know about the answer on the waterfront. I do water capture on my roof. It's legal. I have 2 barrels.
Yep.
I've never irrigated in my time living here. I leave that to the ranchers.
Right. Well, thank you. It's great. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
This is good. Anything else? One of the other neighbors.
I wanted to find out what the acronym BM, let's see, I can't find it now. It's like
BD plus C?
BMOCA or something.
Oh, BMOCA is the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art. And so my sort of nonprofit background has largely been with the arts organizations in the Front Range as well as Pitkin.
Okay, I thought it had to be Boulder something, but then I didn't know what that one meant. And I do see you had done something with historic preservation in Boulder. And just out of curiosity, did you ever cross paths with Marcy Cameron, who's working for the city of Boulder on historic preservation?
I did not.
Maybe she came after you had kind of already left there.
The project I worked on in Boulder reminds me of the restoration on Main Street that's going on. This was a home that basically the foundation was almost non-existent, and they used a technique called permeation grouting, and actually went in and injected concrete to, in essence, create a new foundation and not move the house. So it was the least, sort of minimally invasive way of stabilizing this home. And it sort of mimics what's going on Main Street right now with the old bakery. So.
Wow, interesting. Well, thanks for coming. I guess you'll hear back from us at some point.
Thank you for your time.
Not sure how soon, but it's great to have you in here, and I appreciate the caliber of the people we have is always impressive, and you'd be a great addition.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot.
Thanks for your time. Sorry I was early. I'll blame it on RAFTA.
Yeah.
You were early.
RAFTA is the only way to travel these days. Okay, folks, have a good afternoon. Be safe getting home. We have got what's left? Future agenda calendar?
A break.
Or do we want the break? Need a break?
I would
5
take a
minutes?
break.
We can take 5 minutes, just a
Let's do
quick one.
quick 5 minutes. Is that
We
all
have 2 more
right?
items to kill. That'd be great.
Great.
Good job, Greg.
agendas. And John Peacock is on deck. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're back. Future agendas, starring John Peacock, our county manager. Fearsome powder skier.
Thankfully, it's come.
It's finally winter.
All right. Few things for you on future agendas. We have the EOTC meeting, which was canceled. I apologize, Steve. I know you stayed just to attend that meeting, and then it got canceled due to the snow. 3 dates have been proposed for that rescheduling. One is Thursday, February 22nd. The other is Thursday, March 1st, and the third was Thursday, March 22nd. And looking at board calendars, it looked like we'd have the best chance at everyone being able to attend the March 1st, based on what we were seeing of Tuesdays and Wednesdays when folks might be gone.
And that's at
March
4:30.
1st, I'm going to be at Club 20 committee meeting that day in Grand Junction. I'm committed to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we might end up with the same 3 members that
Yeah.
we were on the last
Yeah.
one. The health insurance 400 to 500% premium support is scheduled for its first hearing on Thursday the 1st.
Oh, it is.
And
Thursday
so
the
I've
1st.
said I will testify on that as long as the road conditions and weather
That's
are
right.
permitting, because I fly out the next day to go to NACO. But I would say if they can get the majority of Aspen and Snowmass on that date, and Greg, George, and Patty can make it, I'd say go ahead.
Okay.
That's on the 1st or the 22nd?
March 1st, and we haven't heard back from the other entities, so we may get another curveball in
Right.
here. As,
I'm definitely gone this Thursday for Club 20, the 22nd, so I could not do it this week. And then I will be out of the country on the 22nd of March. So I can't make any of those 3 dates.
Okay. Rachel's
So
out.
don't even bother.
well, that answers
with-
that.
with
Okay.
me.
Steve, are you around this Thursday? Is this Thursday even? You said that was a possible,
Well,
right?
Patty would be gone. I don't know if George would be back.
Oh, we don't know what George's schedule is.
February 22nd. I will be shocked if we get
People
a
can do it
quorum
that
from
quickly.
the other
That quickly,
two.
right?
Yeah.
I could make that one, and then I could make the 1st.
Okay.
The March 22nd one is open for me. I could make that with no problem.
Let me just double check that one too.
Okay.
And I could be there the 22nd also.
Okay.
April, March.
Now I don't think that would happen because that's day after tomorrow.
Thought I had something on the 22nd. I don't see it now. Maybe it went away. 22nd of March, that is.
I'm
Okay,
just
well,
gonna make some
we'll just wait and
notes
see.
here. Okay, and then the other thing that just to go over with you, we've got a lot of dates coming up where we're not going to have a full board, and so right now it's looking like February 27th and 28th we'll have a full board. March 6th we will not. March 13th and 14th full board, and then the rest of March we will not have a full board, ranging from 4 to 5 members. This is coming up on that period where we re-interview folks for the boards and commissions, and so just wanted to do a check-in with you all. We may have a better likelihood of being able to schedule interviews, and as you know, those go over several meetings because there are typically quite a few of them. If we use some of our Wednesday time to do it, regular meeting time, or as we did today, we could just accept that some of those interviews are not going to occur with a full board and keep them on the Tuesdays. The disadvantage of the Wednesday schedule is it's really difficult
To know
to give
when.
candidates a definite time. Yeah.
It would strike me that if we have to go to Wednesdays, we should maybe look at starting a Wednesday at 10:30 and being able to tell them the interviews are 10:30 to noon or something, or 10:30 to 11:30 so we could break for breakfast. But if we have to go to Wednesdays, I would suggest putting them before and starting the day earlier than noon on those
okay.
days. And that way there'd be some surety about the scheduling. And then if I recall correctly, we have a form that people are filling out when they're being re-interviewed, and the board had a policy of wanting to personally talk with Open Space and Trails because of the money and maybe P&Z, but not every board where everyone's reapplying.
Right, and typically you'd look in, and there was a list of boards, and Rachel, I just can't remember
I'm kind
off
of
the
thinking it
top.
was the ones affecting money
I think the
or
Healthy Rivers
power.
and Streams.
Yeah, because they affect money, and Open Space and Trails affects money, and then P&Z because of the code.
Yeah.
Those were the three we were doing in person follow-ups.
Yeah, and then you also had the opportunity if you wanted to ask for any other
Specific members or anybody like that. And then we can also just look at the forms and make decisions from there. But, you know, and Charlotte's always given us that spreadsheet of how many there are, so it is a lot of different terms coming up. But
Yeah. So
I'm comfortable not having a full board, too.
okay.
You know, if that's the first question you asked. So I'll leave it
Yeah,
there.
and if that's just wanted to throw it out there because we're just hitting on you. There's so much happening with state organizations and such. We're
Travel
yeah.
this time of year, yeah.
On that topic, or similar future agenda topic, and what's happening with Wednesdays, should we invite some of the people in the Healthy Community Fund recipients? I've talked to people I just run into and said, hey, would you be interested in coming to public comment at some point and giving us the 1-minute update on how things are going with your organization and regarding funding and all that? Is that appropriate, and should we be inviting people to come in or just leave it open and see who shows up?
The thing that we've tried to avoid in the past, and it's really up to the board if you want to do that, is oftentimes that can turn into an opportunity to lobby for funding outside of the grant process, and we've tried to avoid providing those types of opportunities so it doesn't cloud the, I guess, objectivity of the
So if we invite one, we have to invite them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's about a report back about how the money was used and the results, they really should be reporting back to the board that granted them the money first, and then that board would wrap it up in a report to us and either consider inviting them to speak to their project or not. But I think it would go through the Healthy Rivers and Streams Board and their administration of the projects first before it really comes to us.
Do you mean the
Healthy
Healthy Community Fund?
The Healthy Community Fund,
Yeah,
or the Healthy River Fund, or any funded.
I was just thinking
county
it'd be
project.
great to be able to raise the public profile of all these organizations, for that matter, if there's a way to do it equitably.
Yeah, and I think that would be the question. And so, you know, if the board is wanting us to put something together like that, we could look at how we could organize that similar to what we do with department updates and such. But I just wanted to raise the, historically, we have avoided doing that because of that, you know.
Well, maybe it's a separate event.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to entertain that idea.
It may be appropriate too to bring it back through the pod, if that, and the pod, and I forget what that stands for now, but it's where the nonprofit groups that do get funding come together and, you know, discuss issues and such. If the board is, you know, wanting us to look at something like that, we can bring back a recommendation.
I want to just put it out there, and we can float it with George and Patty when they get back, just to see.
Yeah.
Because I think it would make sense to raise the profile. Oh, it would just make sense to raise the profile of all these groups. We have so many, and it would take a long time to get through them one at a time, but maybe there's an event or something we can do just to give people a chance to check in with us.
Okay. And that's Rachel, Steve, that's
I think
where you want to go to.
I would be okay with that, especially closer to, we've already given them the money, and the part of the year when they're not starting to come up for renewal would be a better time to do it. So they wouldn't, it wouldn't be on their mind so much to be lobbying us, or if it's one of the organizations that has the 3-year continuing partnership. So they're not every year having to be, trying to compete for the money again.
Right, right.
Those would be maybe more appropriate ones to have come before us.
Yeah, I just like to deal with it sensitively. I agree with the highlighting the work that's done, but it would need to be in a certain format. I just don't know exactly how to get there. I like the idea.
Why don't you come back to us with a suggestion?
We could be sleeping on it in the meantime.
Exactly. Easily, beginning now. I need to raise the tempo here.
Okay.
Okay. What else have you got?
Okay. Rich was in.
Rich on
Do we?
They were all on their way.
Okay.
Yeah, there they are.
Oh, look at that. Saved by the bell. Okay. The other item that we wanted to just give you a quick update on,
Did we actually
fantastic
finish
timing,
future
ladies.
agendas? We kind of skipped around. Are we finished with future agendas?
Oh, I was finished with future agendas. I didn't know if
I'm
you
done.
guys were.
Sorry. I
Okay.
didn't officially
I
close
just
it or
wasn't sure.
anything.
We kind of
Yeah.
skipped into the next
Yeah.
discussion. Okay. Fine.
Were there any board
No,
future
I
agendas?
just
Okay.
want to make sure I got all the
Yep.
notes.
The only note I had to do with the item that said Little Elk Creek, and that was answered in our previous thing because it has to do with the road.
Okay.
Right.
The
Okay.
road situation there, so I got my answer already on that.
Okay. So the only other item we wanted to give you a quick update on is, as you know, we've been going through the process of reviewing ERP systems, enterprise resource planning. So we wanted to take about 5 minutes during open discussion and just let you know where we're at in that project.
Great. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the audience. We appreciate it. Rich Engelhardt, COO. And with me, I've got Ann Driggers, who's our finance director and is really kind of overseeing the ERP project. And then we've got our expert at hand here is Liz Woods. And she is our point person for the project. And then we also have Ben back in the background here. Ben is our procurement.
He's shy.
He is, yeah. He's keeping us in check. If you guys ask us questions and he jumps up, we'll know we've answered it wrong. So, but he's here also. But Ben has been helping us with the procurement side of things. So, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz and let her just kind of brief you on where we're at with the ERP project. So,
Okay. Maybe pull those microphones a little closer.
Oh.
Pick you up at the back of the room. There you go.
So I am the project manager for the project selection, or the ERP project selection team. And since we met with you guys back in, gosh, it was August maybe? It's been a while.
It goes fast.
It does go fast. We have gone through the needs analysis with our consultant, Barry Dunn. They came on site and they basically went through what are your current needs for a system, what are your future needs. From that, they helped develop the joint requirements planning, and they came back on site in end of October timeframe, and they met with a whole bunch of different departments and with the finance team, with the HR team, and they went through this really long, 3,000 line checklist of, is this a requirement for your new system? If it is it critical or is it desired? And so we went through that whole process, and that helped us create the RFP. The RFP went out in November. We got the RFP back, and we had a project, the ERP scoring committee, sorry. The ERP scoring committee was made up of 9 individuals. It was myself and Ann, Connie Baker from the budget, Melissa from HR, Ron Ryan from the Sheriff's Office, Brian Pettit from Road and Bridge, or Public Works, Fran Soroka from Open Space and Trails, and Carrie Fleischman from BITS. Am I missing anybody? I think that's everybody. And so basically we tried to get, Chris Padilla from the airport, thank you. So we tried to get as much reach around the county with as small of a team as we could. And the team has been fantastic. We went through the first scoring session after reading the proposals. That narrowed it down to our vendors who came on site 2 weeks ago, and they did vendor demonstrations. From there, we had another scoring, the round 2 scoring, and we have a preferred vendor at this point that we are doing reference checks on. And once we complete the reference checks, we'll have another round of scoring that will kind of decide if that is the vendor that we will proceed with contract negotiations on. And throughout this entire process, Barry Dunn has been, consultant has been amazing with the work that they've done to help us through this process. So that's kind of where we stand at the moment. It's definitely moving full steam ahead, but it's still a long process to go.
I wanted to thank all the scoring committee who sat through a whole week-long's worth of demonstrations from the vendors. It was extremely hard and tiring work from 8 till 5 every single day, looking at the systems. And although it was very tiring, I think it also very much excited everybody because they could see the potential of all the improvements that we would be able to make in our processes and the efficiencies within the departments. And that was why it was so key to have the airport involved, the sheriff's office involved, open space and trails, because they're going to be the users who are going to see a lot of the benefit. And so want to thank them, and it was very exciting to see what the future might look like for us. So,
how many vendors were there?
There was 2 that came on site for demonstrations.
From a list of 7, I believe. So there's 6 or 7. It was narrowed down to 2.
Excellent. So, a future schedule?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the money has been planned. It's in the budget, but we know a sizable contract is going to be negotiated here. And but we just wanted to kind of update you a little bit, just keep in the loop. So far things are on track, and we feel good about where we're at.
Yeah, just kind of thinking of the bigger picture and the bigger schedule. Once somebody is selected, what are the steps from there?
So it depends on the vendor that we choose. The 2 timelines are different for the 2 vendors, but we're looking at on the top side or on the far side of probably 2 years after, like, from when implementation actually starts, which probably won't be until you get the contract negotiated, and then you have probably a cooling off period of a little bit. So realistically, we're talking probably May, June. June will probably be the earliest, really, to start implementation.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, and do they actually build the program for us, or it's off-the-shelf product with some tailoring for our specific needs?
Yeah, so it's an off-the-shelf product. Both of them are that we're looking at right now, and they'll come in and they'll help implement it so that it's configured to our specifications, basically. So there's nothing really customized about it. It's just that we choose, like, this is the way we want this one to work. We just kind of check a box or something. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's basically the idea, is that we can kind of decide how we want the system to, or how we want our processes to work with the system as well.
And the migration of old data to the new system, is that kind of department by department thing, or does it kind of have to be all done at once, or none of it makes sense, or how does that occur?
Migration will happen all at once, but there's different phases. So you phase it, I believe both the products were the same way, but the first phase is usually financials. So that means basically all of the general ledger gets moved over, and accounts payable and accounts receivable they have like a go live date. And then after that goes live, you start on HR and payroll, and that's the next process. So payroll will actually be done in our current system of Eden for longer than when we'll actually go live on our new system, and then we'll have to be transferring the data for a little while. Historical data is kind of still up on the air of how much we're transferring. We're trying to decide that.
As long as we can track the trend lines for future boards, understand where we've gone with things, that'll be good. Okay.
Steve?
Thank you.
Is there any problem with the move to our new building back from basalt and moving to this new system?
Yeah, that's kind of why we said maybe June would be the earliest, really.
Will it be after we get moved into the new building before we do the transition there?
Yeah, so most likely we'll be moved to the new building before we even start implementation, is my guess. Okay. There might be like a kickoff session or something like that that might happen before then, potentially, but it depends on how long the contract negotiations take.
I'd like somebody to knock on wood, please.
Oh, darn, I don't have any.
Will, and that brings up another question. When we move into the new building, is it going to be all new computer equipment, or are we bringing equipment from down there on the big moving day?
Yeah, so the computer equipment will remain on its replacement schedule. So the furniture and such will be different, but the computers will remain on their current replacement schedule. Yeah.
Okay.
And we've been working to refine that.
Another reason why I think it'll be July before we actually start is that we have the audit to go through and the production of the comprehensive annual financial report, which will be the first time that Liz and I have done it together. So that has to be done by state statute on June 30th. So we'll be all systems go on that, and then the move, and then implementation. So we've got plenty of things to keep us busy.
And then you start on the 2019 budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
That'll
definitely
be about
keeping
that
busy.
time. Yeah.
It's a good thing you all really enjoy this.
Numbers people, you never know. Very good. Well, it's a great project, and really appreciate the diligence and the thoroughness and your approach to it, and needs to be done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we thank you for your support.
Yeah.
This is a big undertaking and a big cultural change for this modernization. So we thank you for the support.
So the last question is, how long will this generation of software be useful to us?
Hopefully 20 years.
A lifetime.
As long as Eden.
A career.
It is hard to say. Both the products that we are looking at have a fairly long history, actually, and they've been good about keeping upgraded and updated with newer technologies. So we're hopeful that it could hopefully last us for at least for as long as
a lifetime.
I'm not sure if I know that.
Are the vendors giving us a guarantee, though, as to how long they will continue to service and update that equipment? That's part of the Eden move, is that they said, hey, we're not even going to service that stuff anymore. Are they giving us any guarantee? I mean, I think to do all this and get 5 years out of it.
Well, it is difficult to get those guarantees too far out, partly because of the acquisitions and such that happen. And so our due diligence has been part of hiring Barry Dunn, who has been keeping track of the industry and those acquisitions and strategies and which products do we think are going to be around. But it is not a contractual obligation at this point that these entities are making, unless something's changed. I'm looking at the team here. But we probably went too long with our current system at the 20 years, and 3 to 5 years is definitely too short. So, but I do think that, probably in a 7 to 10 year time frame, with technology changing and such, it's reasonable to expect we may be either making a change or an upgrade at that point.
Okay, that's good to know.
Excellent. Anything else, folks?
No.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for coming all the way up from down valley.
So the last thing, just fun, and Rich, maybe just real quick, we did set up, and I think it's complete now, a demo of the furniture that's going to be going into the new building. So Phyllis has volunteered to be our guinea pig. So we have set up a
kind of a typical workstation of what it would look like. And yeah, I might go on record of apologizing. Apparently it was pretty noisy when they put the equipment in down in the offices, and we weren't there. So so if any of them are watching TV right now, I can apologize to them. But it's set up. It's kind of a version of what a general office space would look like. It has a stand-up desk and how those components work. And so we're inviting the employees to come down, take a look at it, just to kind of get a sense of what it will be. Now, there will be some that have towers, some that don't, and these towers, you know, they have like a coat closet in it and some different configurations. But this is basically the standard of what we have. But at least it gives them a feel of what the desk type will be and the look.
So if you want to get a sense of that, feel free to stop by and visit.
Sure. Yeah, you'll have similar desks in your offices there. So, and then I might mention that the dais, we have settled on that. Thank you again for the decisions that were made, and we're getting some shop drawings put together of how we're running all the configuration for the media side of it, and we're getting ready to pull the trigger and get that ordered. So, so that's coming along as well.
During the break, I heard Amy just kind of mentioning that Grassroots has not really looked at the new layout of the new room they're going to be broadcasting in or helping figure out what equipment they're bringing over or not. I don't know if that was entirely accurate. Oh, there we go. I had my mic off. So I was just saying that Amy I heard a comment during the break that Grassroots hadn't really looked at the room yet and didn't know how they'd be setting up for us in there. And I don't know how accurate that is or how long ago they looked at the plans, but maybe be sure to network in with them to take a look at the room and tell them what we're thinking of with the monitors on the walls and stuff.
Yeah, we hired actually his name's Wayne.
Show them their space.
Brannigan.
Yeah, and he's our point person, and he's doing all the coordinating for not only Grassroots but also AV experts and the whole group that's going to be utilizing that. But I've seen emails back and forth where Grassroots has been talked to. Don't know that they've physically gone and looked, but we can certainly make those arrangements. But Wayne is our point person for that to make sure that he's communicating, making sure it's wired properly, and has given the locations for the
setting up and everything. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Looking forward to it. Anything else there? Got your letter about the monument?
Oh, yeah. Commissioner Postman had set us up with the Peach Blow
quarry people.
Yeah, quarry. Yeah, to maybe utilize some of that rock for the monument out in front. And what we discovered, the Grand Junction group that is doing the mason that would do it would have to mine it out, haul it to Grand Junction, cut it. They were a little concerned about the fissures that are in it, whether it would hold together or not. So there was just a lot of that, just kind of some red flags about it, other than the fact that it's beautiful rock. And so now we've decided it'll be a very similar product to what you're seeing on the building now, and then we're going to use a peach blow for a monument that'll go over the top of the time capsule. So we'll still use a chunk of that. So we talked to the mason
stone
today.
going into the new project.
Yeah. So,
okay.
But the sign, it's a very attractive sign. It'll go out in front. The bottom will be kind of pillowed, like the look on the base of the new building here in the courthouse. On the top will be more of a kind of a honed look, and then the engraved lettering on it, and it'll have an arrow pointing towards the building, so that it'll lead people right down the path. So it should be very attractive. It'll be uplit and downlit with LED light, solar type, so that there'll be some
And the
lighting
size that fits within the city code?
It absolutely does. We had to,
Good.
It's interesting. We read the code one way, they read it another, and we've ended up settling where it needs to be.
Good.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. I guess that. What? Something else?
No, that's. I was just going to say it's all I have on.
That's all we've got. Okay.
Unless the board has
anything. Can we
I don't think I have anything today.
adjourn for the day?
Let's see. One more. I want to give an invitation to commissioners.
Oh, okay.
The Roaring Fork Farmers Group is having their monthly meeting at Molly's and my house this Saturday. Starting at 3 o'clock, we're going to do cross-country skiing and snowshoeing, and around 4:30 have the meeting, which is sort of a half an hour long. And it would be an opportunity if you want to come and meet some of the young people in the Roaring Fork Valley. It's mostly younger people who are doing these big farming projects and doing some really innovative things. So just put the invitation out. We'll have a sort of a potluck chili dinner afterwards, and
I don't think I'll be able to attend, Steve, but thank you for the invite.
yeah.
Appreciate that.
This is on Saturday?
This Saturday, yeah.
And in the evening or afternoon?
Cross-country skiing at 3 o'clock, and then meeting about 4:30, followed by dinner, followed by hopefully old-time music jam.
It sounds great, and I want to get involved. Right now, I'm double booked with kids set building for the school play. I don't know if I can get away from that. I'll let you know. But it sounds great. I guess that's it. We're done.
We're done. Good job, Greg.
See y'all next time. I guess Patty will be back. I have to go back and just be a regular commissioner again.
Yeah.
You'll never just be a regular
I don't think I'll ever be able to go back.
Once you've been chairman, you have a different perspective on everything the rest of your life.
Thank you, Amy.